Well, hello there, my fellow rushers. How have you been doing today? King Rex here. And recently we reached 900 subscribers. Way sooner than I expected though, but still. Thanks a lot by the way. Thank you for your support. You really helped me out and you showing me that there's place for people like me in this world, so thanks a lot. Your support is very appreciated. And yeah, for today I decided to jump into the tier list videos because we haven't made one in a while. So I decided to rank every tower in Kingdom Rush. And the only exclusion is going to be the bonus towers, even though we have them here. I'm not going to be ranking them because they can be only used in specific situations and only on certain levels, so I can't really judge them completely. So yeah, but every other tower will be allowed. Now, big disclaimer, this is opinion-based tier list, so you may agree or disagree with some of my decisions. And yeah, that's about it. So yeah, let's begin and judge the towers and see which one is good and which one is bad. Starting off from the first Kingdom Rush, we're gonna be doing the Ranger's Hideout. Oh yeah, the Ranger's Hideout. Man, this tower is very, very strong. It is by far one of the strongest towers ever created in my opinion, and you'll see why. Let's start off with its stats. As you can see, it has a pretty long range. It deals between 90 to 13 physical damage, but it has attack rate of every 0.4 seconds, meaning that its damage per second is roughly about 40, which is quite a lot of physical damage when you think about it. 40 physical damage per second is nothing bad. But its strength really comes from its abilities. The abilities are what make this tower outstanding and just unbelievably strong. As you can see, this guy has medium armor, and he's going down, well, technically no armor anymore, but he went down incredibly quickly. The main reason being is because of just the two abilities of this tower. Both of its abilities are very good. The first one is the poison arrows, which basically deals 15 poison damage over 3 seconds at tier 1. Then 30 and then 45 damage over 3 seconds, which is true damage, for those of you who are unaware. Poison damage is basically equal to true damage, which is very good. However, it has its issues. The issue is that it's not a lot for the amount of gold that you're spending. It's not like the most effective thing that you can spend your money on, but in case we're talking about the tower being a standalone, if you have a lot of armored enemies, then the poison can actually be pretty handy because you can damage anything with it, even ghosts, even the good old spectral knights which everyone hates. You can damage them with this thing. Sure, it will not be as effective as using a magic tower, but it will still be a way to damage them, which is very nice. But the true power of this tower comes from one specific ability that most of you probably already know what it is. It's the Rat of the Forest. This thing is broken as F, like literally. It is by far one of the strongest abilities ever created. Basically, if there's enough enemies in its radius, it can catch up to 8 enemies, stunning them for 3 seconds, and dealing 40, 80, and then 120 physical damage over the course of 3 seconds, which equals to a ton of damage being dealt in a short period of time, because the cooldown of this thing is very short. It's only 8 seconds, which means that if you have 3 Rangers Hideout pretty close to each other, you can potentially stall enemies permanently. Permanent blocking power. You can stun lock the entire field pretty much if you spam enough of them. And that's where their power really comes from. You can solo almost anything with them, really. Like, as long as you use the appropriate hero for the level, you can beat it with ease. Like, you can do anything with it. Even heavy armored enemies. You just use a magic hero, or use someone that deals true damage, or someone that has an insta-kill capability. Because that's the only thing that this tower doesn't have, an insta-kill ability. But to be honest, I don't feel like it's really necessary. I feel like this tower is good enough even without the insta-kill. Sure, the poison, is it a little bit overpriced? I would say yes. But that doesn't make the poison a bad ability at all. No. Especially now that it's good, alright? This tower in my opinion is by far one of the strongest towers ever created, and nothing will change my mind about it, so take my rating with a grain of salt, if you wish. Yep, this tower in my opinion is into the best tier. I know, some of you may say, oh, it should be A tier, or maybe S, but best, that's a little bit of an overstatement. Well, nope, it is very, very good. You can solo almost everything in Kingdom Rush with just Ranger's Hideout, it's ridiculous. then you definitely should give it a shot. Even though the poison arrows are a little bit expensive, you can still purchase them, and let me tell you, you can beat pretty much everything. You just need a good hero and good micro skills in order to beat it. Moving on to the Musketeer Garrison. Oh yeah, the Musketeer Garrison. The good old tower that most people neglect, unfortunately. And it's not that bad. I mean, why people neglecting this tower? Sure, it is expensive, but it is good. Now, let's take a look at its stats. As you can see, it has a pretty long range, by far the longest range in the game. At least in the original Kingdom Rush, that is. And it's pretty good. It deals between 35 to 65 physical damage every 1.5 seconds, which is not that terrible. But, however, the average DPS of this tower is slightly lower than that of the Ranger, which is kind of interesting. Basically, its average damage is around 33, which is kind of low. I mean, it's by a few points, but still, it is enough to make a difference. So, just letting you know that. In case people ask you which tower has the higher DPS, at least you know which one it is. It is the Ranger, not the Musketeer, even though the numbers may say otherwise. That's the correct answer. And yeah, that's pretty interesting. But what really makes this tower good is its abilities. The insta-kill, even though it is chancy, it is pretty darn good. Once you max it out, you have 60% chance to perform an insta-kill from a very long radius, even longer than the current radius of the tower, which is pretty nice. However, there are a few issues with it. It's RNG, meaning that you have a certain chance to not get the insta-kill, and if you don't get the insta-kill, you're gonna do a pretty heavy amount of damage, which is still good, and it happens every 14 seconds, so it happens fast enough to the point where you don't really care if you miss the insta-kill, because you're gonna get it back so fast, which is very good. But what I really like about this tower is the other ability, the Shrapnel Shot. It is one of the more expensive upgrades in the whole game. It costs whopping 900 bucks in order to max out, which is a lot, as you can see. But it is very worth it because of the damage that it deals. Now, if you have all the upgrades, assumingly, that includes smart targeting, this thing deals a crap ton of damage. Basically, it shoots a few individual grapes, which in this case is 6. So you're gonna shoot out 6 individual grapes at each load, which is very good. And the cooldown is crazy. It has only 9-second cooldown. 9 seconds cooldown is practically almost nothing, which is ridiculous. That's one of the fastest cooldowns that I've ever seen. And it is incredible. It is quite wonderful to say the least. But is it like as broken as it may seem? Well, to be honest, yes. Yes, it is. It is very strong because of the way it works. Basically, each grape is gonna do 40, then 80, then 120 damage. And that, when you combine all of them together, that's a total of 720 damage at maxed out, when it's maxed out. That's incredible. You can wipe out some of the toughest enemies in the game with this ability, which is really saying something. This tower is very good as a standalone, but the issue is that the Shrapnel Shot has a pretty short radius. Even though the explosion seems kinda big, it's actually kind of small, and it can miss some sublanes, like maybe the top or bottom sublane. It could miss them quite easily, which is problematic to say the least, but that doesn't mean that this tower is terrible. No. Especially against hordes of enemies, this ability can wipe them out very quickly. And I really like this tower. I would say it's probably... nah, it's not better than the Tesla, but it's definitely better than most towers. At least in my opinion, that is. Yeah, this tower is kind of good, even though I praise it like it's Jesus. I can't put it any higher than A. Like, if it was a little bit more, it was a little bit cheaper, S tier, but because of its high price and the fact that the Shrapnel Shot may miss some sublanes, and due to the fact that the insta-kill is RNG based, I can't put it any higher than A. I'm sorry, Musketeer, but I love you. You're my favorite. Moving on to Holy Order / Paladins. Oh man. Oh boy, Paladins. Man, how much I love Paladins. They are wonderful barrack. They are exactly what any barrack should be. A good, great blocker. And that's what they're supposed to do. They're meant to block. They're not meant to be annihilating, but they kinda do. due to that Holy Strike. But let's talk about their stats first. With maxed upgrades, they have 240 HP, they have 60% armor, which is pretty darn good. They do have a pretty small attack between 12 to 18 every 1.47 seconds, but it is still pretty good. It's almost 1.5 seconds, but you know, just a little bit below 1.5 seconds. And they're pretty good. They have 11-second respawn rate though, so they respawn a little bit slower than the other barracks, which, you know, it kind of makes sense for how durable and strong they actually are. So I would say that it's reasonable as to why they have such a slower respawn rate, but their abilities are pretty good. The healing light, it just makes them almost impenetrable to most units, due to the fact that it heals between 120 and 180 HP every 10 seconds. 10 seconds! That's incredible. That means that they can be potentially impenetrable, like they can just regenerate the health that they lost in a blink of an eye. Sure, it takes 10 seconds, but that's usually just enough time to keep them up into the battle. Plus, then you also have the Shield of Valor, which increases their armor even further, up to 75%, giving them high armor rating, making them even more durable. And then if you're wondering, well, they're probably bad at damage, right? Well, they kind of are, but they have this one ability, which is the Holy Strike, which when it maxed out, it can deal between 75 to 135 physical damage. Now, I'm emphasizing on the word physical damage. That means that they will not be able to pierce armor, because some people may think that it deals true damage. And it used to deal true damage back on the Flash version, but now it's only physical damage, which makes a pretty huge difference. And yeah, the thing is that it has it's RNG basically. Every Paladin has a 10% chance to perform this attack, which, you know, if all three of them attacking at the same time, that means you have a total of 30% chance to get a Holy Strike. And it affects a pretty decent AoE, and it's pretty decent if you have a bunch of unarmored enemies like these. You know, you can just wipe them out with a Holy Strike. It is pretty wonderful, it's pretty satisfying to watch them wipe hordes of enemies, which is unusual because Paladins they're not meant to be like great killers, they're meant to be blockers, but on some levels, man, they can just wreck stuff up like there's no tomorrow. And this level is a pretty good example. I mean, look at these spiders. They're going nowhere with the power of the Paladins. It is quite wonderful, I'm not gonna lie. They are awesome. They're good blockers, and they're not terrible against crowds. They can still provide with some damage, which is pretty nice. Yep, these barracks are pretty good. A tier. Definitely very good ones. They do what they're supposed to do. They block enemies until they die. And yeah, there's nothing much to say about them. They're awesome. Moving on to their polar opposite, Barbarian Hall. Oh yeah, the Barbarians. They are kind of a hard subject to talk about, to be honest, because they're by far one of the most iffy units to rank, to be honest, at least for me. Now let's talk about their stats. With all the upgrades they have 300 HP, which, you know, 300 HP is not bad at all. Their damage is kind of iffy, 16 to 24. Now sure, that is technically more than the Paladins, but, you know, their average damage is pretty meh, like only 12 on average, like, that just seems kind of low to me. But that's why you have the more Axe upgrades, which is gonna increase their attack points by 10 with every upgrade, increasing their damage from 16 to 24 at max tier up to whopping 46 to 54. That's a ridiculous increase. And now their average damage becomes... Do you want to know the number? Well, the number is 36.3. That's an incredible difference. If all three of them are attacking together, they're gonna do a whopping 118.9 damage per second. And that's a crap ton. And you may be thinking, well, these guys must be S tier, right? That's an incredible number, bro! Oh yeah, it is, but take that into consideration. They have only 10% armor. Sure, 300 health is a decent amount, but the Paladins have 240, so 60 more HP and like 50% less armor. That's just... I don't feel like that's a fair trade. Sure, the damage is incredible, but they die so easily. That's the issue. They have the damage, but they don't have the stats. They don't have good enough armor to survive for long periods of time. Even with Gerald boosting them, they still die quite easily, especially to demons and all. So yeah, because of that I can't rank them quite higher, but their other abilities are pretty good. The Whirlwind is basically like a better version of the, what would you call it, the Holy Strike. It has 15, 20 and then 25% chance to proc every time a Barbarian takes damage. And it's gonna do a group damage attack that deals between, what was it, 55 to 75 physical damage, which is pretty okay. I mean, it's technically weaker than the Holy Strike, but it happens much more frequently. Basically, if all the Barbarians are taking hit at once, there's gonna be a whopping 75% chance of it happening, so you're gonna get a lot of Whirlwinds if you max it out, and it's kinda nice. And then you have the Throwing Axe, which basically has the same DPS as if they had more axe upgrade all the way up. It's basically like the same thing but with range. And it's kinda okay, but the issue is the attack speed. The attack speed is so goddamn slow. We're talking 3.5 seconds here. That's slower than the Forest Keepers. That's almost the same attack speed as Bolin the Fart Slayer, which really goes to show you how slow they shoot. And they're not very reliable. Like, sure, you need to usually combine them with other barracks because their main act is a gloss cannon. They're a gloss cannon. They're meant to be doing a lot of damage, but they're not gonna be able to survive for very long, so you need to protect them. But usually, if you have enough Barbarians, you should be able to push through a level with ease. But for the most part, I usually combine them with Paladins, because by themselves, if they die, then it's pretty much a GG. Even though they have a shorter respawn time of 8 seconds, it's not all that much. I don't think the respawn rate is too crucial, unless you're doing something very hard and you need your units to be alive, to be respawning for as long as for, you know, if you need your units to be respawning faster, then Barbarians are the way to go. But for the most part, I never found the respawn rate to be something that troublesome. But still, the Barbarians have their moments, but for me they are not the best barrack in the game. Even though they may have the, well, actually, correction, they have the highest DPS in the game, they are not my favorite tower, and that's the way it is. So I'm gonna give them this rating. Yeah, these guys are questionable. For me at least, they're B tier. Now, some of you may think that they're higher, but I don't like them all that much. Sure, the damage is very good, but because of their squishiness and the fact that they're not really good against armored enemies, I can't put them higher than B. They just die too easily, and you usually need to combine them with Holy Order or at least a level 2 or 3 barracks in order for these guys to stay in the back and start hacking away. But then again, their attack rate is so slow that I just don't use them all that much. Sorry guys, but that's my opinion. Moving on to the Arcane Wizard. So yeah, the Arcane Wizard. Well, this tower is kind of iffy. Like, I used to like it before, but now that I looked more into its stats and details, I start to learn that it's not as good as I want it to be. But that doesn't mean that it's horrible. Let's start off with its stats. As you can see, it has a pretty decent radius. It's not bad, it's pretty great. I mean, it says it there, great radius. It deals between 88 to 161 magical damage, but it shoots pretty slowly. And to be honest, to be more exact, it's pretty slow, every 2 seconds. But it's not as slow as the artillery, so that's at least a positive. And it is pretty decent-ish against single targets. It has a pretty good single target DPS, but it's not really good against swarms. That's the issue. It doesn't have a good crowd control at all. Unless you use a bunch of reinforcements and a good hero, that is. Now, it does have one ability which we're gonna touch on, but before that we have to touch on the stronger ability, which is the Death Ray. It's an insta-kill that happens every 20 seconds. And then you can reduce it even further, up to 18 seconds, and then you can reduce it down to even further, or in this case, 16 seconds. Which sounds pretty good, right? Well, yeah, it's technically... well, if we're talking about legitimate insta-kills, it is the fastest insta-kill in the game. Including another one which has the same cooldown, which we're gonna touch on later. But that's pretty nice. Having an insta-kill is always a positive, but considering that it has a pretty long range, it can easily miss. It can miss its insta-kill unless you try to prevent it, like trying to separate certain enemies from each other, or trying to make a specific target go further into the map while others fall behind. It's pretty hard. It's not an easy way to get a good insta-kill with this tower. Unless you get lucky, or you know, you have a perfect micro skills. Then it also has this quote-unquote crowd control ability, the teleportation, the teleport, It is pretty nice, it happens every 10 seconds, and it teleports up to 4, 5, and then 6 enemies down the path, and it's pretty nice. However, there's one thing that I learned recently about the teleport, and it's that with each tier it teleports a little bit further. Originally, it can teleport an enemy between 21 and 30 knots, then it can teleport an enemy between 26 and 35, and then between 31 to 40. So technically speaking, you can teleport enemies pretty far down the path, which is pretty nice. The teleport is okay, but it can also backstab you a little bit, which is kinda the issue with it. Let's say you're trying to make a good rain of fire, you group up everybody, but then boom, a random teleport appears because you haven't timed it right. And then what happens? Well, guess what? You're gonna waste your rain of fire. Sure, you can get the teleport chain. Basically, if you get enough teleports, you can teleport enemies almost infinitely until they overwhelm you, which is pretty good, dope, but it's not really effective when it comes down to using your superpowers, or, you know, we're talking about the rain of fire here. If we want to land a good rain of fire, we want the enemies to be stuck in one place. But unfortunately, with the teleport, they will not be. They will be constantly shifted backwards, making it close to impossible to land a good rain of fire. Unless you like time everything perfectly, which, you know, takes a while. You need to get used to this tower in order to perform this act. And that's kinda the issue with the teleport, but in my opinion, this tower is pretty good when it comes down to single targets, even against bosses. It's pretty decent, but I won't classify it as being very good. I would say it's... well, let's get into the ranking and rank it, shall we? Yeah, the Arcane is kind of questionable, but you know what, because he has an insta-kill, I'm gonna bump him up to C. He's not a great tower in my opinion. Sure, you may be thinking that the teleport is good, and he kind of is, but then again, think about it like this. If we get a rain of fire and this guy teleports the enemies, what's gonna happen? Well, we lose potential damage and we waste our biggest power up. And if you try to get the insta-kill and another Arcane Wizard, let's put it like this. Let's say we have 2 Arcane Wizards and we have 1 Trollbreaker. If we put the teleport upgrade with the insta-kill, let's say the insta-kill goes off, but then the teleport goes off at the same time. Do you want to know what's gonna happen? Well, the enemy is gonna get teleported and not insta-killed, meaning that you're wasting your insta-kill, which is bad. So because of that, I'm gonna put him in C. He's not a bad tower, but he's kind of hard to use and he can backfire on you quite frequently, so C tier it is. Moving on to the Sorcerer. So yeah, the Elemental is kind of a good tower, but you have to be a little bit precise when you use them. He is a hard to use tower, and yeah, well, I'm joking. Unless you're doing this level, then it's actually pretty ridiculous. I don't know why I decided to try it out, but you know, it's not the best level to showcase the power of the Sorcerer, but he is a pretty good tower still. Basically, he deals between 49 to 90 magic damage every 1.5 seconds, and that's pretty good. He also applies damage over time effect, making it so you can basically damage enemies additionally with your basic attack, which makes his DPS actually pretty good. The other thing is that he also has a couple of different abilities that are pretty darn good. The first one being is the Polymorph. It's basically an insta-kill, but you need to tap on the sheep. When you polymorph an enemy into a sheep, you have to tap on him, or try to kill. Or your towers can still target the sheep, but chances are you're probably going to end up tapping it before it exits. Because if the sheep exits, you still lose lives, which is pretty bad. So you have to be a little bit careful with it. It has the same cooldown, so it starts off from 20 seconds, then you can reduce it down to 18, and then further down to 60, which is pretty nice. However, it also has this ability, which is the Summon Elemental, and these guys are beefy. They're pretty good. They start off as having only 600 HP, but they also have a whopping amount of armor. They have 40% armor, which is pretty darn good, and they do between 30 to 50 damage every 2 seconds, which is not bad. And as you increase them, they can get 700 HP, and they can get 50% armor, and they can do between 40 to 60 damage, which is pretty nice. And at max tier, they can do... they will have 800 HP, 60% armor, and they will do between 50 to 70 physical damage every 2 seconds. And the thing is that they do small area damage. Now, I'm not quite sure if it's area or splash damage, but they can damage multiple enemies with their attacks, which is pretty good. And the only issue is that they have very, very slow regeneration, only 20 HP per second, meaning that they're gonna take a very, very, very long time to regenerate if they have been in a tough fight. So for the most part, you want them to die, so that way they can respawn. It's usually faster than waiting for them to regenerate. Like at least that's how I think. But they're pretty good in on themselves. Like they're awesome. I would say sorcerers are one of the best towers. If not, like I would say it's probably top 5 tower, to be honest. It is ridiculously good. And the thing is that it's not even a broken tower. You can still lose easily on some levels, as you can see with Nightfang's scale. As you can see, we're losing quite miserably. But as you can see, the sorcerer was able to hold off for quite a long time. So I'm proud of this tower, and I feel like it deserves a good rating on our tier list. Yeah, I kind of want to put him in S, to be honest. Like sure, some of me may put him in A, or maybe even Bass, but I would say S tier. He's pretty good all around. Even he can even deal with some magic enemies due to the fact that he deals true damage over time. So yeah, he's pretty good tower. One of the best, in my opinion. Moving on to Big Bertha. God damn, man, the big old Bertha. The biggest, baddest piece of artillery, right? Oh yeah, she is. She is pretty badass, not gonna lie. I mean, it's ginormous for once. Yeah, she looks pretty dope. But how good is she? Well, this tower is actually not that bad. It has a pretty good amount of radius. No, it's not as long as like the Arcane Wizard or the Sorcerer, but it's still long, you know. It's not a short radius by any means. It is okay amount of radius, but however, it has a lot of interesting other properties. One of them being that it is pretty strong against hordes of enemies. Like hordes of enemies, this tower can just annihilate them. It is very good against those. However, it kind of struggles against single targets. For example, Throwbreakers. Throwbreakers are kind of her weakness. Well, not really not them, but you know, with them you have also a lot of other weaknesses, like let's say Dark Slayers, what else? Pro Chieftains, etc. You know, just a bunch of any enemy that has a crap ton of HP is gonna be problematic for her to handle. But that doesn't mean that she is weak. No. She is pretty darn strong. She's not a tower that you should be underestimating, because most people just go for the other option, which we're gonna be talking about in a minute. But yeah, Big Bertha is pretty decent. The only issue that I have with her is that she has very, very slow attack rate. 3.5 seconds. That's one of the slowest attack rates in the game, and it's pretty much the slowest out of any tower, at least in the original Kingdom Rush. So that's kind of a big negative. But on the other hand, it has pretty interesting abilities. The first one being the Cluster Launcher, which basically makes her drop a bunch of little bomblets that explode, and they spread, and they do a bunch of area damage. Each one of them deals between 60 to 80 explosive damage, and she shoots out. First of all, she can shoot, I believe, yeah, she can shoot 3, then she can shoot 5, and then 7. And she can cover a pretty wild area, to be honest. She can get a lot of coverage with this ability. Now, even though it is significantly weaker than her basic attacks, it's really good if you have a lot of hordes. If the enemies are hoarding on you and there's a lot of enemies like that, you can easily just use this ability and do some damage to enemies that could be even out of your radius. It has a pretty wide AoE, so that's good. And also has the Dragon Breath Launcher, which is probably her best ability. It's a missile that shoots out every 13 seconds, and the missile deals from between 140, then between 140 to 180, and last but not least it deals between 140 to 220 area damage. And it has a pretty long radius. The interesting part is that the missile gains extra radius as you upgrade it. So at tier 1 it will have only 20% extra radius. At tier 2 it will have 140%, and at level 3 it will have 160, which is pretty darn nice, if I do say so myself. It's a pretty good ability, and you can snipe enemies from across the field. Now even though the missile can be triggered in a limited air radius, that doesn't mean that this tower, you know, the thing is that the missile almost doesn't have a lifespan. That's what it feels like. It still has a lifespan, but it's so long that you will not even notice it disappear for like 99% of the time, if at all. which is pretty darn good. Now, does that make the missile OP? I would say no. It still has a quite a decent cooldown, and you don't really control which enemy you can hit with it. It's kind of like random, but it shoots out fast enough to the point where you can have consistent snipes across the map. It is pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty dope to take a look at Big Bertha just sniping people from across the fields. It's pretty good. I would say it's you know what, I'm not gonna say with what tier I'm gonna give it quite yet. So let's get back to the tier list and rank it up, shall we? Yeah, Big Bertha, I can't put her any higher than A. Like, she's still very awesome if you have a lot of hordes of enemies. And like, she's very good against them. But against single targets, she kind of suffers a little bit. And the clusters, the cluster bombs are kind of cool, like as an idea, but in actuality, they are not very useful. The only good upgrade on the Big Bertha is the Dragon Breath Launcher. It's kind of nice to have around, but that's not enough to make the tower outstanding or anything. And last but not least, we have also the Tesla Coil. Oh yeah, the Tesla Coil, man. The most broken thing ever created. Or at least that's what most people think it is. But it's not, there's gonna be better towers as we approach the game, but... You know, for now, Tesla is probably going to be the better one. Or at least, for, you know, most people. But for me, it is not. Now let's check it out. It deals, when it maxed out, it deals between 66 to 121 explosive damage, meaning that it ignores half armor. However, it can target limited targets, only 3, which is bad. However, it can target flying enemies, which is very unique for an artillery tower, that is, which is making it very effective. But what makes it really meta is one of its abilities, which is the Overcharge. Basically, it creates an aura around it, and everyone in its radius will take between 30 and 40 an additional area damage. Now, it is explosive damage, so it's not true damage or anything. Imagine if it was true damage, then it will be quite broken, but it's not. It is explosive damage. And also has the Supercharge bolt, which basically allows it to hit target more than an additional 2 enemies when you max it out, which is okay, but most people never get it. Unless you're trying to do something very specific, which I don't know what it has to be in order for you to be using this ability. For the most part, it's not necessary to get, that's what I'm trying to say. Supercharged bolt is usually an upgrade that most people never get. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the Tesla in a nutshell. Why is it so good then? Because of the Overcharge. It deals so much damage and it cleans up hordes of weak enemies. However, as you can see, it's not the best thing against everything. Against like Demon Hounds, enemies that are fast and are somewhat tough, it struggles. It's not like a victory card, you know, you can't just place this tower down and you expect to win against everything. I struggled on this level quite a lot with only Tesla, and it took me quite a few tries in order to get it right. So yeah, it isn't an easy task to just do that with the Tesla. So yeah, you can, it's not a free win button, but it is a pretty good tower to say the least. However, I'm not gonna put it in the highest spot. I'm gonna put it in this spot in particular, because that's just my opinion. Yeah, I'm gonna put the Tesla in S. It's pretty good. I won't say it's as broken as Rangers, because 1. It has much shorter range, 2. Shoots very slowly, 3. Is not very good against armored enemies. Even though it ignores 50% armor, you need to combine it with other towers in order for this to work, in order to keep them in radius of the Tesla. Well, the Rangers Hideout, they can stall them by themselves due to the fact that they have Right of the Forest. I'm telling you, it's that broken. And I feel like the Tesla is a little bit overrated, so I'm not gonna put it in Bass. I'm not gonna be like the normies. I'm gonna put it in S still, because it's very good, but I don't think it's quite there to the Bass tier. You can't solo literally everything with Tesla, unfortunately. Now we're moving on to the towers in Kingdom Rush Frontiers, starting off with the Crossbow Fort. Oh man, the Crossbow Fort. This tower is pretty darn ridiculous, to say the least. But it's not as OP as some people may think it is. First of all, let's take a look at its stats. It has pretty good radius, as you can see, extreme range. It doesn't have like the highest radius in the game, but it's definitely one of the highest, which is very good. You know, that's a good positive. It attacks every 0.5 seconds and deals between 18 to 28 physical damage with each shot, which is very good. It has a pretty consistent attack rate with not that bad of a damage output, which means that its average damage is around 46, which is pretty good. But the abilities are what really makes this tower wonderful. But, of course, there's one. Let's be honest. The barrage ability. This thing is ridiculous. Every 10 seconds or so, you're gonna get this barrage that's gonna shoot a few shots at rapid speed that deal between 30 to 40 damage. And you start off originally with 6, but then you can increase it to 8, and then to 10. And that means at max level, you're gonna do between whopping 300 to 400 damage every 10 seconds. That's incredible. Now, I don't think it's as good as the shrapnel shot, because the shrapnel simply can hit a lot more enemies, but that ability is still very strong. And especially against like single targets, this thing shreds. Look at that Gorilla, for example. His health is just melting away, which is pretty darn incredible. And you also have the Falconeer ability, which is pretty much a support ability. Basically, you can increase the radius of nearby towers by 20% and their critical chance by 15%. And the critical chance means that they can do double damage, basically, which is very good, and it's kind of nice. And it also affects the tower itself, and as you can see, the radius becomes pretty outstanding, and that's good. However, there is one issue with this tower in particular, and it is heavy armored enemies. Even though in Frontiers there's not all that many heavy armored enemies, there's still quite a decent amount, like blood shells, what else? What would you call them? Phantom warriors, you know, immortals. There's still some enemies that can resist the barrage, and that makes it somewhat, well, I won't say useless against armored enemies, but it's not like the best option either. There's definitely better towers than it against armored enemies, but usually if you combine it with some hero that deals magical or true damage, like Ashbite, Shatra, Nivus even, this tower can shine this tower is good, man. But I won't say it's as good as some people may think it is. So I'm gonna put it in this spot in particular. Yeah, Crossbow Fort is okay, and the barrage ability is pretty strong. But that's really all it is, so I'm gonna put it in A. Like, you may be thinking that it's an S tier, but it's just the barrage ability. Sure, it is very strong, but that's about it. It's not really outstanding archer, besides that it doesn't have much outstanding qualities besides this ability. That's the issue. If it had, like, I don't know, maybe the Falconeer could be useful on some maps, but for the most part I rarely buy it. I just get the barrage and just go wild. And that's about it. But they're still a very good archer. It's kind of like the Musketeer, but, you know, cheaper. And now we're getting into the tribal axe throwers. Yeah, the tribal axe throwers. These guys are quite an interesting tower, to say the least. They have a lot of strengths, but also quite a few weaknesses. But let's talk about their stats. As you can see, they have slightly shorter range than the Crossbow Fort, but just by a little bit. However, their damage is pretty high, 30 to 47 every 0.8 seconds. I believe that's what their attack rate was. Yeah, it was 0.8 seconds. Which means that their average DPS is surprisingly a little bit higher than the Crossbow Forts. Their average damage is about 48, which, you know, it's slightly higher, but still higher. Which is good, but the abilities are what really defines this tower as being very unique. It has multiple totems. The first one being the Totem of Weakness, which basically will make it so that whenever an enemy gets in radius, which is this red totem right here, his attack will get reduced, and he will take 40% extra damage from every source. And on iOS, the crazy part is that these totems are stackable, meaning that you can potentially make enemies take over 100% extra damage if you stack enough of them, which is quite ridiculous, but you know, on the definitive version of the game, that's not the way it works. They don't stack. And you also get the Totem of Spirits. Also, I forgot to mention that. For the Totem of Weakness, it starts off as having a duration of only 3 seconds, then the duration increases to 6, and then to 9. And the crazy thing is that the cooldown of this guy is 10 seconds, so you're gonna have only 1 second off time, you know, in between the Totem of Weakness, which is pretty ridiculous. You can just spam it everywhere, which is nice. For the Totem of Spirits, it has 8 seconds cooldown, but after you increase the duration, it starts off from 4 seconds, then 6, and then down to 8. Basically having it permanently everywhere. You can have it permanently appearing all the time, which is very nice. As you can see, 8 seconds, which is awesome. However, if you don't know what this thing does, basically, it removes every magic ability of an enemy, which is very nice, especially for levels like this where you get a bunch of shamans, which can give, you know, high armor, high magic resistance, or they can regenerate their hit points. That's very nice. And this tower is good, don't get me wrong. If you have a good choke point and you combine it with the right towers, you can do some incredible stuff with it. But as a standalone tower, I don't find it to be like super good. Like on iOS, yes, it will be, but on the definitive version, I don't find this tower to be like the best standalone tower. And that's how I'm judging most of these towers, as how well they perform by themselves. And even though right now it looks like they're doing pretty well, on levels where you have a lot of armored enemies and where you unfortunately you're gonna need a lot of stalling power, these guys kind of, you know, they get less good. But if we're talking about like a regular game, they're one of the best options that you can get. They're really good on set choke points, just spamming Totem of Weakness and Totem of Spirits if you have magic enemies. It's awesome. And if you combine them with like Satan or what was his name, Cause, and you use the Totem of Weakness and then Rain of Fire, imagine the amount of damage that you're gonna do, man. Holy crap, it will be quite ridiculous. Yeah, these guys are cool, but if we're talking about if we're talking in the sense that, like, let's say we're trying to use them as a standalone tower, like, we use nothing but axe throwers, the results aren't very good. So I'm gonna put it in B. Like, it's still very good if you have a choke point and you put it in there, just get Totem of Weakness and Totem of Spirit, but as a solo tower, it's not really great. It's not all that good. Like, the attack rate is fine, the damage is okay, but there's something about it that it just doesn't click to me when I use it as a solo tower. You usually combine it with a bunch of other towers in order to maximize the damage of or to maximize the efficiency of the Totem of Weakness, and that's about it. But still, it's a pretty good tower. Moving on to good old Assassin's Guild. Oh my god, Assassins. Alright, now these guys are insane. Let's just get that straight, alright? Assassins OP? Yep, indeed they are. But, what can they do? Well, to start, they don't have all that much, like, their stats seem terrible. 220 HP and low armor, which is 20% with all of the upgrades. That means that their efficient HP is gonna be kind of low, to be honest. Like, their efficient HP is, the equivalent of it is somewhere around 275, which doesn't seem all that much. However, they have one ability that more than enough makes up for it, which we're gonna touch on in a minute. But before that, they also have the sneak attack, which basically gives them a chance to perform it, which is 10%, and you can do between 20 to 40 true damage. Then the chance will increase to 15%, and the damage will increase as well by 10 points, and the damage will increase once again by 10 points, and the chance will increase from 15 to 20%. So, theoretically, every 5th attack should be a sneak attack, at least in theory. But the good thing is that they also have a very small insta-kill chance. It starts off from 3%, then increases to 4, and then to 5. So you have 5% chance to perform an insta-kill, and the more assassins you have on the same target, like if you have 3 assassins on one target, you have technically 15% chance to perform an insta-kill, which may not seem like all that much, but believe me, it is very, very strong. It is one of the more interesting abilities that I've ever seen. Plus they also have this ability, which is the reason why they don't really need to have such a high stats, is because of one specific ability, but we're gonna check it out in a minute. Basically, it is this thing. What would you call it? The counter attack. Basically, they have a 50% chance to dodge any incoming melee attack, and they can counter it for 20 to 24 physical damage. Yes, it is physical damage. It's not like true damage or anything. It's nothing too fancy. But then it can increase to 60, and the damage will increase as well, and then all the way up to 70%. And the damage is between 40 to 44. That's incredible. If you combine that 70% chance, you wanna know how much their efficient HP is? Each one of them will have an efficient HP of whopping, drumroll please. Well, I don't have a drum, so they just improvise. 916.6 efficient hit points. That's an insane amount of hit points, bro. Do you realize how much efficient HP that is? You think that the Paladins are good? Because, you know, each Paladin without the upgrades will have about roughly 600 efficient HP. These guys wreck the Paladins as far as durability goes. That's incredible. And they also have this pickpocket thing, which is kinda nice. Basically, they can steal between 1 to 3 bounty every time they hit an enemy. Originally it has only 20% chance, but now, after you upgrade it, you have 30 and then 40% chance, which is very good. And the thing is that the crazy part is their damage. the damage that these guys can perform is otherworldly. You know how I said Barbarians will probably have the highest DPS? I feel like Assassins need to have this, because look at that. Like, if you combine their statistics, like let's pretend that let's say that they're all maxed out. If they're maxed out, their damage is going to be between 141 to 175.8 damage per second. That's if all of them are attacking at the same time. That's insane, bro. Insanity in its finest. If I have to say, I would say Assassins are stronger than Barbarians. I feel like that's just the way it is. If you want to argue against it, then go ahead into the comments, but to me, Assassins are always the better option to go. They are incredible blockers, they're incredible damage dealers. They have some weaknesses though, like enemies that have area damage, they can't dodge enemies that deal area damage, nor that they can dodge ranged attacks, but as you can see, they become invisible when they are not in melee, so that means that they cannot get targeted, but usually you're gonna have a combination of ranged enemies with melee enemies, and even if they don't want to, they have to just stay there and, you know, get exposed, meaning that they will be exposed to ranged attacks. And with ranged attacks they can die quite easily, to be honest, especially if they deal magic damage, but the fact that you can use to kill such tough enemies like blood shells within a blink of an eye is just too good to miss, man. Too good. They are by far one of the best barracks ever created. Not quite sure if they are the best, I feel like there's one more barrack that's a little bit better than them, but still these guys are quite outstanding to say the least. So yeah, Assassins definitely deserve a good spot on this tier list. Oh yeah, these guys, man. Easy S tier. I won't classify them as being bass tier because there's still a few things that they cannot take down. Like brutes, for example, they can easily insta-kill them, but the brutes can also annihilate them with their grouped attack, and they can't dodge this. They cannot dodge area damage, they cannot dodge ranged attacks. Even though they're invisible, if they're in melee combat and there's enemies that have range in the back, they're gonna easily annihilate them. And let's not forget that there's ghosts in this game, so yeah, they will not be able to do anything against them. Sure, they may be able to insta-kill them, but that's the Phantom Warriors, they also have Death Aura, which can easily drain them, so yeah. But they're still very good, don't get me wrong. You can solo some of the post-game levels with just Assassins, so they're definitely S tier at least. And however, we get the polar opposite, Templars. Oh man, the Templars. A tower that most people definitely despise, and for a good reason. Now, let's take a look at their stats. First of all, they have, with all of the upgrades, they have 275 HP. They have 60% armor, which is surprisingly very close to being high, which sounds good. But their damage seems pretty high, like 20 to 30 damage. That's quite a bit, right? Well, yeah, but the attack speed is very slow. We're talking 2.47 seconds. I thought it was 2.5 seconds, but apparently that's only on flash, so that's good. But still, it's pretty close to 2.5 seconds. So they attack very slowly, which means that their average damage is very, very low. It's so low that I'm not even gonna say it, because it's just, disgusting. Well, let's say that they do like... oh, you will be so disappointed. 10 damage per second, technically speaking. You know, their DPS is 10, which is... I mean, compared to the Assassins have higher damage than these guys. And their attack was pretty bad, so yeah, you can already see how poor they designed the Templars are. So they have to be very durable, right? Well, yeah, their total durability is actually pretty good, or sorry, their efficient HP. It's roughly 687.5, which is pretty good, you know. Just as a base, as a base Templar, that's pretty good. However, there's an upgrade called Toughness, which is going to increase their maximum HP by 50%. 50%, no, it's by 50 points. Sorry, I'm messing up my words today. But that's pretty good. However, it's 200 whopping gold, and each upgrade is going to give them 50 more HP, giving them a total of 158 more HP, which is actually making their durability very good. You know, their total efficient HP is going to skyrocket all the way up to 1062.5. Which is actually pretty solid when you think about it. That's a lot of durability. However, the issue is the amount of gold that you need to spend on this in order to make it work. Take for example the Assassins. In order to make them super effective with their counter attack, you only need to spend like 350 gold. While these guys, you need 600 in order to make them so much more durable, which usually most people will never get. They also have this arterial strike, which is supposed to be kind of like their damage ability, but it's kind of questionable because basically it has every Templar has 10% chance of to perform this, and basically it's gonna make an enemy bleed, and the enemy is gonna take at max level, it's gonna take 165 true damage over 3 seconds, which sounds good, right? Oh yeah, but it's damage over time, and usually you're not gonna do a strategy like mine where you just spam nothing but Templars. You're usually gonna have a lot of other towers surrounding the Templars, meaning that they're probably not gonna be able to, you know, perform their to maximize the damage out of their arterial strike. Plus 10% chance, that's really not that much. I mean, for the Paladins, it's okay because it's area damage, but these guys they can only affect a single target. And 165 true damage is not all that much when you think about it, at least in Frontiers. So yeah, and they also have this Holy Grail, which basically makes them have a chance to become, to basically survive a lethal strike. And basically, if they take a devastating blow, they have a small chance to survive. It starts off from 20%, then 30%, and then it ends up at 40%. And 40% is, to be honest, not all that much. For the most part, I find this upgrade to be kind of meh, but, you know, in some tough situations, I guess you can use it, and it's way more cheaper to get than the toughness upgrade. So yeah, in my opinion, Templars are just trying very hard to be a ripoff of the Paladins, but they fail miserably. Like, durability is not the only factor that you need to take into consideration when you create a barrack. A barrack needs to be good all around. A perfect barrack is, for example, in my opinion, the Assassins, because they have pretty good amount of damage. They can deal with tough enemies, they can deal with small hordes of enemies, and they're pretty durable. While these guys, they're just durable. They don't do all that much damage, their DPS is very underwhelming, and they're tough. But then again, Assassins can easily outlive them due to the fact that they can dodge so many attacks. While these guys, they're just kinda there. I guess they are a little bit more useful if you have like magic enemies and you need as much HP as possible, or if you have some enemies that deal area damage, because as I said before, Assassins cannot dodge area damage. So in this situation, maybe the Templars are gonna be better, but I already find them to be useful. So yeah, because of that, they kinda have to get a bad rating, unfortunately. So yeah guys, I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. Templars. The only situation I can see Templars being good is if you have a lot of ranged enemies or enemies that do area damage. That's when Templars may be the better option, but for the most part Assassins are just straight up outclassing them. Moving on to the Archmage. The Archmage. This tower is an interesting one, for sure. It's not my personal favorite tower, but it has its good sides. It's not a terrible one. To start off, let's check out its damage. Originally, this tower deals between 60 to 120 magic damage, which is pretty decent amount. However, there's the Brilliance upgrade, which I'm not gonna be taking into consideration simply because it's gonna make my calculations a little bit easier. Because with the Brilliance upgrade, the damage becomes pretty high, between 86 to 172, but let's assume that the Brilliance upgrade is not in play. Well, that means that the average damage of this tower without Brilliance upgrade, keep in mind without it, it's going to be approximately, well, actually no, it will be exactly 66, which is pretty nice, you know, it's a pretty decent amount. It's not bad by any means. However, the attack speed is okay, it shoots every 1.5 seconds, so it's pretty much, I think, the same as the regular mages. Maybe, yeah, it is the same. I'm sure about that. And yeah, the good thing is that the upgrades are quite interesting. First of all, we have Twister, which is basically gonna be summoned every 22 seconds. It used to be 23 back on Flash, but they've changed it to 22. And that's not bad. And you're gonna get you're gonna capture 5 enemies that are getting into it, and it's gonna do 40 magic damage to them. Now keep in mind, it is magic damage, not physical or true damage. This tower is pure magic damage. Well, we're gonna touch on the other ability in a minute, but for now let's keep talking about the Twister. So yeah, the distance that the Twister teleports is originally only 20 nodes, which It's not like all that much. Sure, it is not terrible, but it definitely could be better. But later on, you can capture 6 enemies and do 60 magic damage, and on top of that, you will teleport them further by 25 nodes. But then, after you upgrade up to tier 3, it's even more interesting because you can blow back up to 7 enemies and do 80 magic damage, and the distance will increase all the way up to 30 nodes, which is pretty good, you know, that's 50% better than the original one. And then you also have the critical mass, which basically gives every attack a 35% chance to explode and do an additional 30 magic area damage. Again, magic damage. So as I said, this tower is pure magic DPS. It doesn't have any physical or true damage abilities, but that's still pretty good. That extra burst damage could be helpful, and it starts off at 30, then it decreases to 60, and then it caps out at 90 magic damage. And that's not bad. That gives it a pretty good amount of average damage. Now this tower, is it great as a standalone tower? I would say it is good, but the fact that it has pure magic damage means that magic resistant enemies are gonna be troublesome, like these Night Scales. As you can see, we can't take them down very easily, even with maxed out Archmages. They still take a long time to take down. But they're very good against armored enemies. If you're struggling on a level where there's a lot of armored enemies, this tower is definitely gonna help you out to beat them up. And if you add the Brilliance upgrade, well, the damage is gonna be obviously even better. As far as the range goes, it's okay. You know, it's pretty good. I would say it's good. Yeah, in general, this tower is good, but it's not like too amazing. Because of the fact that it deals pure magic damage, it can be very great standalone tower. So yeah, because of that, I'll be putting it in this spot in my tier list. Yeah, the Archmage. To be honest, he's kind of okay. I'm gonna put him in B. I don't find him to be too powerful or too outstanding, but I would say that he is still a good tower. You know, he's not a bad one, but he's not like super good either. I would say smack dab in the middle. You know, B tier, not bad. Moving on to the Necromancer. Yeah, the Necromancer. The Necromancer is one of the most beloved towers by the community, but let's be honest for a moment. Is it really the best tower ever created? I don't think so. Let's talk about its stats first and foremost. It has a pretty good radius, as you can see, pretty much the same as the Archmage, which is okay. It deals originally without any bonuses from the Brilliance. It deals only between 20 to 70 damage, and it attacks every 1 second instead of 1.5, which is good because now its average damage is almost 50, it's 49.5. It's just a little bit off of 50. So yeah, on average it deals less damage than the Archmage, good to know. But the thing is that most of its power comes from the skeletons disgrace. You see, whenever an enemy dies in its radius, you're gonna get a skeleton, and based on their HP you can get a regular skeleton or a skeleton knight they don't have a lot of good stats. They're mostly there just to, you know, give you some of that extra stalling power, and they do their job pretty well. You know, you definitely get quite a decent amount of stalling power. However, there are a few enemies that are not gonna turn into skeletons, like Reapers, Pokai Riders, what else? No, the Pokai Riders, I feel like they can be turned into skeletons, but stuff like Ghosts, Phantom Warriors, Spiders, Warhounds, enemies like those will not be affected by the Necromancer's special passive ability, which means that they will not be turned into skeletons, which kinda sucks. However, the abilities of this guy are kinda iffy. The only good one is the Death Rider, which is basically this guy. He basically improves the damage of nearby skeletons by 50%, and it increases their armor by 30%, making them pretty durable, I suppose. But they still die quite easily. But now that they can take at least a few more attacks, it's actually pretty good because it actually can affect stuff like Ulrich's Sand Warriors and Boneheart's Wishbones, which are basically the small things that he summons every now and then, which is good. And then you can increase his stats even further. And basically at maximums, when it's maxed out, this guy has 350 HP and 60% armor, and he deals between 15 to 25 damage, physical damage might I add. I don't know what his attack speed is, so I can't really make sure what his I don't know what his average DPS is, but I'll assume it's okay. You know, it's not good, but it's not like super bad either. It's kind of in the middle, I suppose. And it's good because the total durability of this guy at max level is 875. So 875 efficient HP. That's not bad. That's actually pretty decent for blocking. However, there's one ability that's kind of in a neglected and for a good reason, and it is the Pestilence. It basically summons a cloud of Pestilence that deals 20 true damage per second for 4 seconds. That means you do 80 true damage in this area, which is good. However, that's not all that much, and it's kind of expensive. I mean, 292 gold, even without the upgrades, that's still kind of pricey. And then the duration gets increased to 5 and then 6 seconds. So in total, you're gonna do at best approximately well, not approximately, it's gonna be exactly 120 true damage over 6 seconds, which it's not all that good, to be honest. Like, it's not as strong as it should be. I feel like it's pretty underwhelming. Even though the area that it covers is good, it's not like a great ability, at least in my opinion. I would say don't buy it. It's for the most part useless. I mean, let's try to see it. There it is. As you can see, the AoE is good, but I don't find this Pestilence to be all that great. Unless you have like a ton of skeletons to keep enemies in it. But even then, I find this to be kind of meh. But still, due to the sheer stalling power that the Necromancer can deliver you, and he can provide, I'll give him a pretty good rating, I suppose. Yeah, the Necromancer is good, but the fact that the Pestilence is one of the worst abilities ever created, and it's not like, it doesn't have like super strong attack damage, but you know what? Due to the fact that you create so many skeletons over the course of a game, I'm gonna put it an A. It's still a good one, some of you may put it even an S, but I won't say that they're that good. Sure, you create a lot of skeletons, but that's it. That's why you get this tower, just to get that extra stalling power, and it does its job pretty well. So I'm gonna put it in A, just because why not? Now we're moving on to the Dwarf. Man, the Dwarf. The Dwarf is an amazing tower, to say the least. He is very good, but he does have his flaws, you know. There's no such a thing as a perfect tower, or at least we haven't found one quite yet. You know, there are some that came very close to being perfect, but this tower isn't. It has its issues. First and foremost, let's talk about its statistics. As you can see, it has pretty decent range. I mean, it's not really good in comparison to like others. Like, comparing it to the other towers in Frontiers, it doesn't have like a super long range, but it is a good range nonetheless. And it deals between 28 to 50 damage every 3 seconds, which sadly makes its DPS pretty low. It's only 13. That's very low. Well, on the lowest DPS, I would say probably the lowest one. But the thing is that it makes up for it because of this thing. It has a pretty interesting property. It can damage every single enemy in its radius, and due to that, it actually has a pretty good damage. Even though it's only 13, it's 13 on an infinite amount of enemies, making it actually very strong. And that's good. However, it also has a nice interesting other passive, which basically allows it to basically slow down enemies by, I think it was, let me just check my notes there. It was 60% slowdown. It slows down enemies by 60%, and on top of that, it also makes it so that, you know, like, the slowdown is good. It's 60% for 0.4 seconds. Now, even though the duration may seem like nothing, you know, it's less than half a second, it's still nice. You can notice it with the enemies. As you can see, this guy, he got slowed down for a brief moment, and that's kind of nice. It's good. You know, it's a nice addition. And keep in mind that it is still explosive damage, which means that it ignores half of armor. So yeah, it's pretty good. I would say probably one of the best artilleries ever created, but what makes it really good is its abilities. Starting off with the core drill, it's basically an insta-kill that happens pretty frequently, and then you can reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds and an additional 3 seconds. Basically, at tier 1 it has 23 seconds cooldown, at tier 2 it has 20 seconds, and at tier 3 it has 17 seconds cooldown, making it actually one of the shortest insta-kills ever created, which is awesome. However, it cannot insta-kill a couple enemies. It cannot insta-kill blood shells, it cannot insta-kill ghosts, nor Phantom Warriors. I think there was something else. Oh yeah, they obviously cannot skill mini bosses, but you know, nobody cares about that. Its other ability is what really shapes up the tower the way it is. The Furnace Blast. Basically, every enemy in its radius, when it glows red, it's gonna create this burning ground. And it's gonna do 100 true damage in its radius to everyone who steps in it. And that's incredible. But then you can increase it even further to 175 and then all the way up to 250. That's 250 true area damage all across this radius. It is beautiful. Now, sadly, the range of the Furnace Blast is a little bit shorter, just a little bit shorter than the actual range of the Dwarf. So if you combine it with the Crossbow Fort with Falconeer ability, it's actually gonna be a downgrade. So you gotta be careful about that, but other than that, this tower is amazing. It deals an incredible damage, and if you're wondering how long the cooldown is, it's basically 15 seconds. Or in this case, every 5 attacks you're gonna get this beauty, which is very good. Like for 15 seconds doing that much true damage across your radius, that makes it one of the best abilities ever created, period. I love this Furnace Blast, and probably most of you love it as well. And for a good reason, it is wonderful. Especially if you combine Dwarf with a Bruxa, it's actually pretty nice, I would say. Like, there's probably better heroes to combine the Dwarf with, but I would say Bruxa is one of the best. At least in my opinion. Yeah, Dwarf goes into the S tier. For sure. Just damaging everything in its radius, slowing them down, stunning, delivering 250 true damage every 5th attack, having an insta-kill, it's wonderful. Any ground enemy is gonna die to this thing. Sure, it struggles against ghosts and flying enemies, but that's really the only weaknesses that this tower has. Everything else gets annihilated. It is a wonderful tower. But there's something even better, which is the next tower. The Battle Mecha. Holy goodness, Batman. The Battle Mecha is online. By far one of the best towers ever created, if not the best. I'm not quite sure if it's the best tower created, but it's definitely one of the best. Let's talk about its stats first. As you can see, it has a pretty small area that it can move, but keep in mind that this is an artillery. Basically, it's a movable artillery. You can move it around wherever you want. It's awesome. It is quite nice. It doesn't have like a gigantic rally point, but it's still pretty decent enough. You know, it's not like completely bad or anything. It's still pretty nice. And the good thing is that it has an incredible attack rate. It shoots once every second, and it deals between 28 to 61 explosive damage, meaning that it ignores 50% armor, which is always a positive. And that means that the DPS on this thing is 44.5, which doesn't seem all that much. Like, some of the archers easily can outclass this tower by DPS, but you keep forgetting that it's an artillery, so that means that it can hit multiple enemies, making it incredibly strong. Like, it is ridiculous. As you can see, these brutes are not going anywhere, and these guys have over 4000 HP. We're just melting them, like they're nothing. That's the true power of the Battle Mecha. But what really is good is the last upgrade for the artillery, which basically gives every artillery a small chance on each attack to stun an enemy. And this tower shoots so fast that it can potentially perma-stun an enemy, which is so good. But the real power comes from the Wasp missiles, which are these things. Basically, every 8 seconds it's gonna shoot a volley of 2 missiles that deal between 20 to 80 area explosive damage, which is pretty nice. But after you upgrade them up to tier 2, you're basically doubling it, so you're getting double the power, which is just crazy. And then, in case you don't have enough, you can get the Waste Disposal, which is basically an ability which allows the Battle Mecha to drop it basically drops a bunch of garbage or something like this. It just drops it and it slows down enemies by 70% for 2 seconds. Now 2 seconds is not great, so you probably want to increase it. If you increase it to tier 2, the duration is gonna get increased by 2 seconds, and the tier 3 is gonna get increased by another 2 seconds, making it a total of 6 seconds duration. And 70% slowdown is nothing to mess around with. That's incredible amount. If you combine it with Bruxa's slowdown, enemies are practically not moving. It's insane. Ignore the fact that I've lost a couple of lives, that's because Grow ended up doing a pretty bad job, and you know, dead costs exist. But still, this tower is incredible. It can wipe out pretty much anything. The only issue that it has is there's a couple enemies that actually could make the Battle Mecha kind of useless. They are the Bloodshell, and of course, who can forget about the ghosts? The good old annoying ghosts. But other than that, Battle Mecha can pretty much take down anything. Tough enemies, dealt with. Hordes of enemies, even easier. Bosses even, yep, it can even take down bosses. You just spam this tower everywhere, man, that's all you do. Just get it, put it in a good position, upgrade the Wasp missiles, maybe waste disposal if you don't have a lot of stalling power like this level, and you're gonna be rocking. So yeah, this tower definitely is mucho broken. Oh, Battle Mecha, easy best tier, the bigger brother of the Tesla, just OP, man. Wasp missiles, waste disposal everywhere, shooting at an incredible speed, doing area explosive damage. And it's a movable artillery. Like, what do you want more? This is the perfect equivalent of a broken tower, and it's going into the best tier. And now we're jumping into Origins, which is my favorite Kingdom Rush game. Let's start off with the Arcane Archer. Oh man, the Arcane Archer. Now this guy is quite a piece of awesomeness, because this guy is very good. Like, let's start off with its statistics. As you can see, the radius is okay. You know, it's not like phenomenal or anything, but the range is pretty darn good. I won't say that it's bad by any means. It deals between 24 to 38 physical damage, and it shoots once every 0.8 seconds. And it shoots multiple arrows, which is pretty good. So the total DPS on this guy is surprisingly not as good as I thought it was. Only 38.8, but still, that's not terrible either. And the thing is that this guy has a passive ability of reducing magic resistance. 3% per shot, to be honest. And that's pretty good. Because if you have a lot of magic enemies and you want to use magic, then you definitely need at least one of these guys in order to reduce the magic resistance of the certain enemies. Which is very good, especially against enemies like Archmage. That this tower is pretty darn nice. But what really makes it good is the abilities. Especially the burst arrows, which happen every 12 seconds, and they do magic area damage. You see where the craziness starts coming. Not only do you reduce magic resistance with your basic attacks, but every 12 seconds you do massive magic area damage, basically. It's wonderful. Now it deals with all of the upgrades, it deals 88 damage at tier 1, 176 at tier 2, and 264 at tier 3. Now, if you don't have the upgrades, it's gonna do 80, 160, and then 240. But still, that's an incredible amount of damage. And it happens every 12 seconds. That's pretty good. It's not broken or anything, but holy crap, is this good? It definitely is. And then you have the slightly underwhelming ability, which is Slumber Arrows, which is not terrible, but it's not good either. Like, you have basically, you can make an enemy go to sleep, which is technically a stun, and you stun him for 4 seconds, or 4.4 seconds if you have all the upgrades, which doesn't seem that great. Maybe the cooldown is what makes it good, right? Not really. It starts off as having a 20 seconds cooldown, then 16, and then 12, which just doesn't seem all that great. I mean, it's not useless, but in a regular game, most people will not even consider getting this upgrade. But I would say that it has its uses, especially when I tried it out on Master difficulty. It helped me out quite a bit. So yeah, this tower is pretty good, and I think it deserves a pretty good place in our tier list, right? Well, let's give it. Yeah. Now that I think about it, I originally was planning to put them in A, but judging by how good they are, I'm gonna bump them up to S. I think they deserve it. Like, they reduce magic resistance, they do magic area damage, they can stun enemies occasionally, and they do pretty good amount of damage. I would say they're S tier. Sure, you can't solo like literally everything with them, but they can solo most of the game by themselves, which is quite impressive. Moving on to the Golden Longbow. Now we're moving on to the Golden Longbow, and this tower is kind of questionable, at least in my opinion. It's kind of like the Arcane Wizard, but better, because it has an incredible radius. I would say one of the highest radiuses in the game. It's not like the highest, but it's definitely one of the highest that have ever existed, which is amazing. It deals between 48 to 63 damage every 1.5 seconds, which gives it not that great of a DPS, to be honest. Like, the damage is only 37 flat, which is surprisingly lower than the Arcane Archer. However, it has this interesting part where it has a short radius. Basically, if an enemy is too close to the tower, if it's in a certain radius, then it's gonna start shooting faster, every 0.7 seconds, but it will do less damage, 16 to 21. Which means that the average DPS in short range is approximately, well, not approximately, what am I saying? Well, basically the number is going to be kind of meh, to be honest. It's not like great, but it's not like terrible either. Basically, it's gonna do about 25.7 DPS, which doesn't seem all that great, but it's not like atrocious either. However, what really makes this tower up is the abilities. The abilities are pretty good. And also, I forgot to mention one thing before we continue. The golden longbows have a 6% chance. 6% chance to deal double damage, which deals true damage, by the way. If you see that crit icon, that's what it means. It is awesome. However, they only have 1% chance if they're short range, so yeah. I just decided to mention it, just in case if some people decided that I haven't mentioned it, well, here it is. Now for the abilities, you have one that seems kind of OP, but it's not really. Crimson Sentence. It basically gives the golden longbow a chance for an insta-kill on every attack. Basically, at the tier 1 you're gonna get 3%, then 6, and then 9% chance to perform an insta-kill. And if you get all the upgrades, you're gonna get 3.3, 6.6, and 9.9% chance. Which sounds pretty good. It's almost 10% chance at max tier, but it's 900 gold, and that's pretty expensive. And the thing is that if the tower is shooting at a short radius, the chance gets reduced by half. Which makes it kind of bad, right? Well, yeah, I mean, if you max it out, I guess you're gonna get a good amount of insta-kills, but you can't really choose which one you insta-kill. The insta-kills are gonna be happening at random, and it's not very consistent. It's kind of an unpredictable tower, so I don't really like this upgrade, even though it helps out on some levels quite a bit. For the most part, I don't use it. However, what I do use the most is the Hunter's Mark, because this thing is awesome, because it targets an enemy, and the enemy takes 200% extra damage from all sources. And if you had all the upgrades, it's gonna be 220% more damage, which is incredible. And at tier 1, the duration of the bullseye is going to be 5 seconds, then 10, and then 15. But the crazy part is that this thing has only 12 seconds cooldown, so if you get it at tier 3, you can potentially mark multiple enemies, which is pretty dope. It is a good tower, not gonna lie, but it has one thing that kills it as a standalone tower. Lack of crowd control. It's not really good against hordes of small enemies, especially if you have like a ton of spiders. This tower is probably gonna suffer quite a bit. Sure, it will take care of the tough enemies with ease due to the bullseye and the Crimson Sentence. However, when it comes down to hordes of enemies, this tower suffers quite a bit. So because of that, I can't give it quite as high a rating as I want it to be. So yeah, unfortunately, you have to be positioned right about here. Yeah, sorry guys, but the golden longbow goes into C. Because he is a tower for one and only purpose, dealing with tough enemies. If you have a tough enemy, you can mark him and do double damage to him, or straight up insta-kill him, and that's about it. But it's not really good against crowds, like, it's a single tower purpose, kinda like what the Arcane Wizard is, but you know, a little bit better. So you know what, yeah, they're both belonging to C tier in my opinion. I won't say that the golden longbow is worse than the Arcane, but I don't know. I'm gonna keep him in C. Moving on to the Blade Singers. Alright, and now we have the Blade Singers. Pretty much one of my favorite barracks, if not my favorite barracks. They are pretty dope. As you can see, their stats are okay. They have 200 HP, and they have 60% armor with all of the upgrades, which means that their efficient HP is flat 500, which is not terrible. You know, comparing to the other barracks, that's pretty high. But it can get even higher due to one of their abilities. But before that, let's discuss their damage. On average, their damage is, they do between 10 to 14 physical damage every 1 second. Which means that their DPS is actually very low, 12. 12 damage on average is not great, that's pretty bad. However, there's one upgrade that you can use, which is the Edge Mastery, which is gonna increase their attack speed by 20%, and it's gonna give them 5 extra attack points, which is gonna increase their DPS by 9.25, which makes their DPS actually kind of okay. You know, it's definitely useful, but what's even more useful is the other abilities. Oh my god. Let's start off with the Blade Dance, which most of you are probably familiar with. Well, in order to be triggered, you need to have at least multiple enemies, or in this case, at least 2 enemies, in order for this ability to be triggered. It has 10 seconds cooldown, which is pretty dope, because at the tier 1, a Blade Singer, each one of them can dash between two enemies, stunning them briefly, and dealing between 20 to 35 true damage. True damage, that's the key part. However, after you increase it even further, now each one of them can dash up to 3 enemies and deal between 35 to 47 true damage. And at tier 3, every one of them is gonna be dashing between 4 enemies, or across 4 enemies, and it's gonna do between 40 to 56 true damage with each individual shot. That's insane amount of damage, and you get some stalling power in the process. Do you realize how much damage the Blade Singers can do? This is incredible. Let's say that it's a tier 3. You know how much they're gonna do? Well, if all 3 of them use the Blade Dance and they dash across enemies, they're gonna do whopping between 480 to 672 true damage. That's insane number right here. And it is true damage, which it makes it even better. And speaking of true damage, they also have the perfect parry, which basically gives them 10, then 20 and 30% chance to basically make them invulnerable for multiple seconds. So for 2 seconds they would not take any damage from any source, including, doesn't matter if you have ranged attacks or grouped attacks attacking them, they're just gonna dodge it and they're not gonna take any damage. They also have this nice interesting thing where basically whenever they spin they do 36 true damage in a small area, which is pretty awesome. That's just more true damage, man. Like the sheer power of these guys is insane. And the perfect parry is pretty broken. I mean, you can almost solo bosses with Blade Singers, as you can see with Gudayat. He's going nowhere, he's dying. Like, Blade Singers, I don't know if that's correct for some people, but for me, it is. They are mucho brokeno. And they're going into the highest spot possible. Holy goodness, Batman Blade Singers. Oof, this is hard. But, this is my opinion, so screw it. Last tier you go. Incredible guys, man. Just incredible. Like, they can just destroy literally any unit. They can stow it, they can slice it with their with their blade dance ability. Like, they're wonderful, man. I can't hold myself. I'm putting them in the best tier, and I don't care. You can press a fat dislike, but that's the way it is. And now we're jumping into the Forest Keepers. Forest Keepers. The good old Forest Keepers that everyone likes. However, are they as good as people think they are? Well, before we begin, let's explain their statistics. They have 300 HP and pretty low armor. Now, that doesn't mean that they are completely atrocious. They're still pretty durable, but they're not like as strong as some of the others. Blade Singers definitely outmatch them when it comes down to durability, but there's also one more issue with them. There's only 2 of them instead of 3, which is strange because usually we're getting 3 units every time. But these guys, you get only 2 of them. So there must be a reason for it, right? Well, yes, there is. It's because of their damage. Each one of them deals between 24 to 36 damage, but don't be fooled, that's only their melee damage. And their melee damage is not terrible, 24 to 36 is pretty decent, and they're able to shoot out every 1.3 seconds with it. Which means that their average damage is actually pretty decent. You know, it's about 20, it's pretty much 23. And 23 is not a little number, it's pretty good. It's good, but I don't know, I don't find it to be like super great. It's still better than the Blade Singers, but whatever. However, they have ranged attack that deals between 45 to 69 physical damage, which sounds pretty good until you realize that they shoot every whopping 3.1 seconds. And that's bad. 3.1 seconds is a very slow attack rate. And because of that, their average damage is actually lower than their melee damage. It's only 18.3. That's bad. That's just bad, man. However, they more than make up for it with one of their abilities, at least. That's the Circle of Life. Basically, whenever they take damage and they drop below a certain amount of HP, they will regenerate. For 80 HP over 4 seconds, then you can regenerate 160 HP, and then 240. And 240 is almost their entire health, which is good, but still, it takes some time for this to happen. It will not be an instantaneous boom, you get like 240 HP back. it's not like the Paladins in the original Kingdom Rush, where everything happens instantly. Here you have to wait for a little bit before this happens. So that's kind of iffy. But still, because it happens every 10 seconds, that actually can make them durable enough to survive against a pretty good amount of enemies. Sure, they will not be able to survive like literally everything, but they'll be able to tank for quite a while. And then they also have this ability, which is the Eerie Gardener, which is gonna cover an area with barbed vines. That's gonna slow down enemies by 50%, and it's gonna do a okay amount of damage. It's gonna do 72 physical damage over 4 seconds, or the duration will be 4 seconds, and then you can increase everything besides the slowdown duration. The slowdown duration will be the same, which in this case is 50%, but it's gonna last for 6 seconds. And you're gonna do 144, I think, yeah. It was 144 physical damage, which is not bad. It's actually pretty decent. So yeah, that's good, but I don't know, I don't find it to be very useful for the most part. Like, it's not like it's complete garbage or anything, but I really find myself using it for some reason. I don't know why, I just don't really like it. But that doesn't mean that it's terrible. In some situations, especially in the challenges, that could be nice. But what really shapes them up the way they are is one specific ability that most of you probably use like crazy. It is the Ancient Oak Spears. Holy goodness, Batman, this thing is ridiculous. Basically, it allows their spear throws to become incredible. And they're gonna deal they're gonna do exactly 90 true damage per shot. 90 true damage. That's quite heavy amount of damage. Now keep in mind that their attack rate will be the same. So their attack rate is still gonna be pretty slow, but you're gonna do a lot of damage. 90 true damage is not bad. Then you're gonna do 125, and then all the way up to 160 true damage. That's outstanding, man. That's a total of 3. That's like wait, I'm just messing up my words there. That's a total of 320 true damage every 3.1 seconds. That's insanity right here. But keep in mind, even though they're great damage dealers, they can still get taken down quite easily. As you can see, even with the Circle of Life, multiple golems are just enough to take them down. Blade Singers would have just turned invulnerable and they would have tanked. These guys, not quite. But still, that doesn't mean that they're bad blockers. They are okay blockers, but I would say Blade Singers are much better for blocking than Forest Keepers. But Forest Keepers are mostly there for damage output. They can put out some decent damage, and if you want a bunch of true damage, you can use them whenever you want. They have 2 seconds cooldown, which is something I forgot to mention for most barracks, the respawn rate, because I don't find it to be super important, but it kind of is. So yeah, the Blade Singers have slightly longer respawn rate than the Forest Keepers, which is kind of strange if you ask me, but alright, I guess that's the way the developers wanted it to be. And yeah, overall Forest Keepers are great damage dealers, but due to the fact that they lack stalling power, they can't just kill everything by themselves. You need to usually combine them with Blade Singers or some other means of stalling power in order for them to devastate enemies from afar. And that's usually how I play with them. I don't know if some of you are gonna put them higher than what I'm gonna put them right now, but to me, they are not quite as broken as people make them up to be. But still, this is my opinion, so take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, Forest Keepers, I'm gonna keep them an S. Like, they're very good, but still. There's only 2 of them, they have pretty low durability, and even though they have this Circle of Life ability, they can easily get killed by Bandersnatches, they can easily get killed by Golems, they can easily get killed by Shadow Champions. Like, there's still so many enemies that can just shred through their regeneration, while Blade Singers can just become invincible. Like, there's a big difference between having a high regeneration and becoming invulnerable, guys. Sure, they do a lot more true damage, but there's 2 of them and they shoot very slowly. So yeah, in my opinion, these guys are better. Fight me on this one. Moving on to Wild Magus. Yeah, the Wild Magus. A tower that is quite good, but also kind of questionable at times. It has its good things, but it's also not like the best tower ever created, I would say. Like, it has its good moments, but well, let's just talk about it. As you can see, it has a pretty decent-ish radius, but it's not like really good in comparison to like the other towers. Like, comparing it to the archers and some other towers, it's not quite as good as you may want it to be. but it doesn't mean that they have like a terrible radius or anything. It's just slightly shorter than your normal tower. Then they have very good attack, or at least that's what it's supposed to be, 10 to 19, but they do bonus damage on each individual shot. And the thing is that they shoot very fast, every 0.3 seconds. That's incredible attack speed. And due to that, they have a very high damage output. They have 48.3 average damage per second, which is pretty ridiculous if I do say so myself. It's not bad. That's pure magical damage, keep in mind. And speaking of magical damage, it also has quite a few interesting properties. It has multiple abilities that make it very good. One of them is the Eldritch Doom, which is basically gonna give this tower the ability to insta-kill an enemy, and the enemy is gonna explode doing 80 damage to all other nearby enemies. And then the damage will increase to 180 and then to 200 and whopping 60. And that's pretty good. That's good, but the thing is that you have to keep in mind that this damage that you're gonna get is magical. So you're not gonna get like true damage explosion or anything. And the cooldown is pretty long, it takes 28 seconds for this bad boy to charge up, so it's one of the longer insta-kills in the game, but, you know, it's a good one. And then you also have the Ward of Destruction, which basically silences an enemy for 10 seconds, which, silencing a single enemy is so useful. Yeah, that's why you upgrade it, because now you can silence up to 3 enemies, and then, at max tier, up to 6. And that's actually kinda nice. If you have like a bunch of Scourgers, or Evokers, or Hoplites, you know, basically any magic enemy that you see, this ability is gonna help you out quite a bit. And the thing is that it silences them for 10 seconds, but it has 11 seconds cooldown. So there's gonna be a split second where enemies will be able to perform their magical abilities. So it's not like a permanently silencing an enemy like, for example, Dante's Holy Grenade. That thing can silence an enemy permanently. But this thing, not quite. But since you can silence multiple enemies once you get it up to a higher tier, it's not bad. And this tower is actually very good against single targets. It's not terrible at crowd control due to the fact that the insta-kill provides some area damage, but still, against magic resistant enemies, it kinda suffers quite a bit. But because of its sheer power against single targets, and the fact that it's one of the best things to use against bosses, I have to give it at least a reasonably good rating, and I think I've made up my mind on where should I put this tower. Wild Magus is interesting. It's kind of like the Golden Longbow and the Arcane Wizard, but I'm gonna bump him up to B. Like, it's still very good, but you know what? Considering the fact that it deals bonus damage on each shot and can silence enemies, that's a little bit of extra points, so I'm gonna put it in A. It's very good. Like, sure, it doesn't do anything against magic resistant enemies, but like, as a standalone tower, it is pretty good. Even though it doesn't, it has its crowd control thing going on for it. You know, when it kills an enemy, it deals a lot of magic area damage. That's kind of good. So I'm gonna put it in A. Maybe it's not quite an A, but I'm gonna put it in A because I kind of like this tower. Moving on to High Elven Mage. Okay, now we're moving on to the High Elven Mage. This guy, who most people never use, which is understandable because this guy, he doesn't have too much outstanding qualities, unfortunately. Let's start with his range. It's kinda meh, not gonna lie. In comparison to the other towers, it's pretty short. The damage is kind of okay, I suppose. He does between 46 to 83 magic damage, and he shoots every 1.5 seconds, which means that the average damage on this guy is flat 43, which is kinda meh. It's not meh. Alright, it's good. Alright, I don't wanna piss some people. It's good. It's not like an amazing damage output, but it's still good. And the thing is that he can hit 3 enemies at once, which is pretty nice. And that's pretty cool. And if you want, but the thing is that not all of them have equal damage. The way this guy works is pretty strange. Basically, the original bolt, which is the big one, it deals between 31 to 54 damage. While the two side bolts that split apart from the main one do only between 5 to 10 damage. So if you have a lot of hordes of enemies, this guy's actually not gonna do all that well. In fact, he'll be kind of meh, he'll be kind of atrocious. So you wanna focus all of the bolts on one enemy, but usually that doesn't happen, so yeah. I just wanted to let you know. The more you know, right? So yeah, maybe the abilities are good. Yeah, the abilities. Well, the time-lapse is kind of questionable as far as how good it is. Basically, you can capture enemies into magic bulbs. And You can basically you can stun them for 5 seconds. They're not gonna move, but however you can't damage them with your other towers or abilities while they're into these bows, which is kind of whack if you ask me. However, they take damage, but they take magic damage, not true damage or physical damage, which for a long time I thought it dealt true damage, but apparently no, it is magical damage. And the cooldown is 16 seconds, so yeah, you can't quite perma-stun. I mean, if you get like 3 high oven mages, I guess you can perma-stun an enemy, but there's usually better ways to stall enemies rather than just spamming time-lapse. But let's check it out. Basically, at tier 1 you can capture 2 enemies and do 100 magic damage. Then you can, at tier 2, you can capture 3 enemies and do 135 damage. And at tier 3, my bad. You're gonna have the opportunity to capture 4 enemies and do 150 magic damage to them over 5 seconds. So yeah, it's kind of okay, but for the most part I don't tend to use it. It's not really cost effective. However, then you have the Arcane Sentinels, which are kind of cool, not gonna lie. But they're pretty nice. Basically, each one of them takes about 4 seconds to charge up, maybe 5, I don't remember, and they start shooting at enemies. They have pretty long radius, they can reach pretty much almost just across the map and just start shooting at enemies. They do magic damage though, they don't do true damage, it's pure magic damage dealer, kinda like the Archmage from Frontiers. And they shoot out 10 little bulbs over 5 seconds. And then they disappear, and you know, you have to wait for a little bit before they start shooting again. And each one of them deals between 16 to 32 magical damage per shot, which is pretty good. So yeah, that's actually not that bad of a DPS. It's good. If you have multiple of them just shooting at random enemies, that can be nice, you know. Some extra damage is always helpful. Not quite sure if it's like the best thing to get for 300 gold, but I would say it's kind of okay. It's not terrible ability, but it's not like the greatest ability either. This guy is just so underwhelming at certain situations, and because of that I can't give him that high of a rating. Sorry my guy, your design is awesome, but you're not that good. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do to you. The high open mage is okay, but yeah. Sorry man, D tier. You know what? Maybe. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in C. Like, sure, is he useful? Most situations, probably no. But whenever you use him, he is kinda good. The Sentinels can deliver some good extra damage, and the time-lapse can give you that little bit of stunning power that you would otherwise not get. And it removes enemies for 5 seconds. 5 seconds is just enough to get your reinforcements recharged halfway, which could make a huge difference. So you know what, I'm gonna put it in C. It's not very useful overall, but I won't say it's as bad as the Templars. So yeah, he's definitely better than them. Moving on to the artillery, starting off with this guy, the Archdruid Hench. Yeah, this guy. A tower that most people don't really use at least they don't use too often. And I can see why. It's not like a great tower. But let's check it out. As you can see, the range is kind of okay, you know. It's a little bit better than the mages, so that's at least a positive. Other things, the damage, 33 to 56. That's pretty much the exact same damage as a tier 3 artillery tower, but the attack rate is pretty darn fast. It can attack every 1.7 seconds, which is not bad. It's not like exactly 1.5 seconds, but still. That still makes it attack at a reasonable rate, I suppose. It's not like super fast, but it's decent. And that means that the DPS of this tower is actually not too terrible, 25.1, or sorry, 25.9, my bad. Yeah, that's almost, yeah, I suppose it is good. But don't forget that it also deals area damage, and in this game at least, or in Origins, artillery ignores armor, it basically deals true damage, so that's some pretty consistent true area damage, if I do say so myself. It's not like super phenomenal, but it is decent-ish. The abilities of this tower are quite nice, but as you can see, there's also something I forgot to mention. You can make it hold up to 3 rocks, similar to how the Archmage in Frontiers works, and you can toss them at once, and you can do some good burst damage, so that's kind of cool. But then you also have these things, the bears, which you can summon 1 and then 2 for 350 gold each, so they are kind of expensive. And are they worth it? Well, that's up to you. I would say that they're okay, but they're not like too phenomenal. Let's start with their stats. They have 250 HP, and they have low armor, which means that their efficient HP is not that great. I mean, they only have 312.5 efficient HP, which, you know, it definitely could be better. It's not like too outstanding. So yeah, I would say they're fine as far as durability goes, but it's not like as good as it could have been. I feel like if they had like more health or slightly more armor, they would have been better, but I would say they're fine because they do kind of okay damage. They do between 20 to 40 damage every 1 second. So that means that they do 30 damage per second on average, which is quite nice. And then you also have the Sylvan Curse, which basically is gonna happen every 16 seconds, and you're gonna curse an enemy for 5 seconds. And the cursed enemy, basically, if you do a certain amount of damage to him, and every enemy that's close to him is gonna receive that damage as well, which is pretty dope, if I do say so myself. It's kinda nice. And you're gonna do 35% of the damage dealt, then you're gonna do 70% of the damage dealt, and last but not least, you're gonna do a complete amount of damage, or in this case, 100% of the damage dealt. Now, that's pretty good, because let's say you have a choke point, like this one, and you have like other towers besides just the Arc Druid Henge. Let's say you have a Wild Magus, and let's say the Wild Magus is targeting a specific enemy, and this enemy gets targeted by the Sylvan Curse as well, and he's surrounded by other low tier enemies. And guess what? The low tier enemies are gonna die because of how much damage this guy is taking. He could be able to tank it, but the little guys, they'll be as good as dead. So yeah, that's a pretty nice way to clean up enemies. It's quite creative, but I don't find it to be like super good because you can't really choose which enemy will have this curse. So in some cases, you may be screwed over by it if it affects like a low tier enemy or someone who has barely any HP left. Because if you affect someone who has like 10 HP, like it's not much at all. So yeah, because of that I can't quite give it a good rating, but I'll still give it a reasonable rating because it's nice, it's consistent true damage, and it provides some stalling power, so it's not complete garbage, but I don't know. We'll see. Let's get into the tier list and see what was my final decision. Yeah, the Arc Druid Henge is okay, but nah, he's not that great. Sorry man, you're going straight down into the C tier. Like sure, the bears are okay, but that's the issue, like they're not really good as an additional blockers. Usually Blade Singers do more than enough. The bears are just there in case you have like an insane swarm. If you have an insane swarm of enemies and you have restricted spots, I would usually go for Blade Singers rather than this guy, but you know, some people still like him, but for me, the Arc Druid Henge is just kind of garbage for the most part. Moving on to the Weirdwood. Oh man, the Weirdwood. Yeah, this artillery is quite nice one. It's not as broken or it's not like as broken as Battlemaker or Tesla by any means, but it is so good having around. Like it's a rarity for me not to use this tower. For the most part, I find myself using it quite frequently because it is good. All right. Some people may say that the Weirdwood is trash, but it's not. You need to use it more frequently, you need to use it more often, and you will see the true power of this beast. I mean, let's take a look at his stats. He has a pretty long radius, surprisingly long for an artillery. I mean, look at that. That's extreme radius. Sure, it's not as big as the Golden Longbow, but it's still pretty wide, so that's good. Which is gonna be very important for one of his abilities, which we're gonna be checking out in a minute. Yeah. His damage is between 69 to 117 explosive damage, meaning that it ignores half of armor, but still, as I said, the artillery in this game, after you fully upgrade it, it deals true damage, so technically speaking, it is true damage. However, the issue is the attack rate. The attack rate is very, very slow, every 3.5 seconds, making it one of the slowest attacking towers in the game, but still, even after that, even with such an atrocious attack rate, the damage out on this thing is very good. That basically means that it's gonna deal approximately 26.6 true area damage per second. You know, that's his DPS, which is pretty darn ridiculous. You would think that the Arc Druid Henge will have the advantage on that because of the, you know, the higher attack speed, but apparently no. Nope. This guy is the better option as far as true damage goes, if we're talking about like DPS. And yeah, the abilities are actually very nice on this guy as well. At least one of them. The other one is kind of good, but it's also very hard to use, so I don't know where I will put it, like, to be honest. So yeah, let's just see it. The first ability is a Clobber, and basically what this Clobber does is it damages enemies. It damages every enemy in its radius, and it allows it to stun them for 1, then 2, and 3 seconds, and it deals 75, 100, and then 125 true damage, all around its radius. That's some insane stuff right here. Do you realize how much area this guy covers? Everything in this radius, damaged. However, you need at least multiple enemies in order to achieve this result, otherwise it's not gonna happen. But as you can see, some of the enemies are not getting stunned, and that's because the stun is chancy. You're gonna stun at least 2 enemies from what I was able to find, but after that there's a certain chance that you may or may not stun the other enemies. So it's kind of inconsistent when it comes down to stunning enemies, but it can stun quite a bit, to be honest. And 125 true area damage all around it, it's pretty nice. And it happens frequently enough to the point where it's good. Like, I think it happens every 14 seconds. My bad, I was thinking that it was 24 for some reason, but it's not. So yeah, that's awesome. And the thing is that the next ability is also good, but it's hard to use. We're talking about the Fiery Nut up in here, which, even though it says it deals 130 damage, it's not true. It deals way more than that. It deals 135 damage at tier 1, 276 at tier 3, and it deals whopping 405 explosive damage on landing. Now, even though artillery ignores armor, this ability for some reason doesn't get affected by the upgrade, which is kind of weird because it technically is explosive damage, it's not true damage. But the burning counts as true damage, and the burning can do 100 damage if you like, let's just say that you keep enemies for the full duration. If you keep enemies for the full duration into the fire, you're gonna do 100 at tier 1, then 200 at tier 2, and then 300 damage at tier 3. And that's incredible. That's so much damage, man. This nut is amazing. And you should not be underestimating it. It deals massive damage. It is wonderful. It's a little bit hard to aim, but at least you know when it's gonna happen. It happens once every 8 nuts, or in this case 25.5 seconds. So the cooldown is kind of long, but it is expected. I mean, this tower deals so much damage that it kind of like, the ability is so strong that you kind of have to have a long cooldown in order to balance it out. So I can completely understand why the cooldown is so long, and to be honest, I'm fine with it. This tower is still wrecking. Like, it is amazing. You can beat pretty much the entire campaign with just Weirdwood and nothing else. You'll be fine. It is that good. The only issue is that it cannot hit flying enemies, but still, the Weirdwood, in my opinion, is one of the better artillery when it comes down to pure raw damage. So yeah, I'll put it in a pretty decent spot in my tier list, to be honest, because of how underrated it is. Like, this thing is very good. Oh yeah, Weirdwood, S tier, man. I don't care what you say, this big nutter is incredible. Having the ability to, he has this dwarf ability going on. You know, he has that Furnace Blast, but in a different way. It deals half the damage, but it stuns almost every enemy in its radius. It's really good. The Fiery Nut, even though it's hard to use, if you use it correctly, you can burst down so many enemies. It's wonderful. But you know what, considering that it's so expensive, maybe I'll bump it down to A. I'm sorry, my big nutter, but you're too pricey. If you were a little bit cheaper, maybe S tier, but unfortunately that's the way it is, man. And now we're moving on to Vengeance, which is probably the game that most of you probably hate. Let's start it off with the Shadow Archer. Yeah, the Shadow Archer. This guy. Well, he is kind of hated on by the community for being like a bad archer, but in reality, he's not too bad. Like, let's take for example his range. It is pretty good. For an archer, that's some incredible radius, and I'm very proud of that. His damage is between 25 to 37 physical damage every 0.7 seconds, which is not bad. That means that his average damage will be almost 44.3. or in this case it will be 44.28, so it's very close to being 44.3, but whatever, it's still a okay-ish amount of damage. The main thing that I really don't like about this tower though is the abilities. The abilities are kind of iffy, because most of them are relying on you using them against single targets, so that means that this guy, he kind of has the same issue as Golden Longbows and you know who. So because of that, I can't really put him too high, but his abilities are interesting to say the least. The first one is kind of a rip-off, to be honest. It's a rip-off of the bullseye, but not really. Oh, sorry, the Hunter's Mark. I messed up. The Hunter's Mark from the Golden Longbow. That's pretty much what it is, but in a different way. You're gonna affect enemy for 5 seconds and he'll take 30% extra damage. Then he will take 60% and a tier 3 is gonna take 100% of the damage. So that's not good. That's not bad, but I don't know, for 5 seconds. The good thing is that it can affect bosses. Even though on the wiki you may find some information which can tell you that it doesn't work on bosses, it does. I've tried it and it works. The cooldown is a little bit long though, every 20 seconds. I'm not quite sure if it's really worth it, unless you're having like some really threatening enemy, but considering the plethora of options that you have for your defense, I would say that this is kind of unnecessary. Unless you wanna just do a crap ton of damage to a boss, like this level. Like, well, I don't find this ability being all that useful. And then you have the Blade of Demise, which is an insta-kill that has an insanely long cooldown when you buy it. 40 whopping seconds. That's even longer than the one on the Wild Magus, so yeah, it seems pretty atrocious. But you can reduce the cooldown, which is, you know, the positive part, right? Oh yeah, you can reduce it by 10 seconds, meaning that you're gonna get the insta-kill every 30 seconds, and then you can reduce it by an additional 6 seconds, making the cooldown for the insta-kill 24 seconds. Which still is kind of long-ish, it's still not like super fast to get insta-kill, but, you know, it's an insta-kill nonetheless. However, because of his long range, he can easily waste it, so yeah, that's a little bit iffy. And then we also have the Crow, which we already know what it is. It's an atrocity. I'm not even gonna talk about it because I just get sick every time I see this upgrade. So yeah, I would say that the Shadow Archer is not as bad as some people say he is, but the main thing that kills him is the abilities. He doesn't really have all that much outstanding abilities. Like an insta-kill and Vengeance is not very worth, while the Hunter's Mark is kind of, or you know, in this case the Shadow Mark is kind of, it's not very useful in most situations, and the Crow is just a waste of an ability slot, so yeah, because of that I can't quite put him in a good spot. So he'll kind of have to stick up with the spot that I've picked for him, which is gonna be this tier. Yeah, this guy is kind of average, to be honest. I'm gonna put him in C. Not great, but meh. He has some good uses here and there. Moving on to Arc Warriors then. Ah, man, why do I even talk about these guys? We all know that they're not great, but still. I said that I will make a tier list on these towers, and I have to sadly review this tower as well. So yeah, the Orc Warriors then. Probably one of the worst towers ever created. Let's check out these guys' stats. They have 260 HP, which is good. They have 20% armor, which makes them have an efficient HP of 325, which yeah, it's not that great. That's kind of disappointing, to be honest. But their damage may be great. Nope, 9 to 5. They have 1 second attack rate, which makes them have a kind of a sad little DPS though. Their DPS is equivalent to 11.5, which, disgusting. Disgusting damage. It's very, in a bad way, not in the good way of disgusting. You know, it's not like broken or anything. But I would say because there's 3 of them, at least you get some consistent stalling power, but they have 12 seconds respawn rate, which doesn't really help them out all that much. However, you can increase their damage by getting their Lust for Combat by 40% and then 80%, making their damage increased for up to 17 to 27, which actually makes their damage somewhat okay. You know, 22 DPS, that's actually kind of reasonable, but I don't know, I just still don't like them. That's just not good enough. And then you can get the Captain promotion, which is gonna give you an Orc Captain, or Orc Champion as I like to call him, because he kind of looks like one, if at least for me. And he is good, like he has reasonably good stats, like his stats are good, he has a pretty good amount of HP, and a lot of armor, and his damage is actually good. Like, without the list for combat, his stats are actually not that bad. He has 19 DP, 19 damage per second, and he has a pretty good amount of efficient HP, 780. That's quite a bit. But to keep in mind that this is only one. Only one of them will have these statistics. So yeah, that's kinda sad. Imagine if all of them got that improvement, then it will actually be very good, but unfortunately, that's not the case. And then, of course, as far as his damage goes, when he has the list for combat, it's actually pretty good. He has, I believe, 34 average damage, and that's quite a nice amount of average damage. But, as I said, it's only one, so you'll be doing that damage at mostly to one target, and no more than that, which is kind of sad. Then you also have this Seal of Blood, which basically gives them passive regeneration, which is not that great. It's only like 5, then 10 HP per second. So yeah, it's not that great, it's kind of a meh ability to be honest. Sure, it makes them more durable against like low tier enemies, but most barracks are good against low tier enemies anyway, without the need of a regeneration. So yeah, in my opinion, these guys are kind of worthless. Sure, they are cheap and all, but unless you're doing some hard challenge where you're using them, then I don't see them being useful in like most situations. Sure, you have 3 of them, which is kind of good, but I don't know. I just can't give them a good rating, man. I'm sorry. You guys are complete trash for me. Yeah, they kind of have the same issue as the Templars. They're good blockers, but nothing else. D tier. Like, considering your other options, these guys are just meh. For the most part, I barely use them. Moving on to Inferno Mage. The Inferno Mage. Yeah, this guy. Well, let's check him out. Kind of an okay radius, to be honest. It's not like super bad, but could be better. That's for sure. His damage is between 53 to 160 magic damage, and he shoots every 1.8 seconds, which means that his average DPS is 59.2, which is surprisingly good. Yeah. For like, if you're looking for a good magic dealer, as far as DPS goes, this guy is the way to go, but his abilities are what kinda throws me off out of him. Like, you have the Affliction, which is gonna last for 5 seconds, and it's gonna reduce the armor and magic resistance of an enemy for 5 seconds, which is good, by 25%. And then you can do it by 50. And the cooldown is 12 seconds, so you can reduce armor pretty frequently, and magic resistance, which can improve this guy. This guy pretty much can improve his own damage with this ability, especially if you're on a level where you have a lot of heavy magic resistant enemies. And then you also have the Lava Fisher, which we're gonna upgrade them all the way up, but ignore the numbers, they are completely wrong, because the Lava Fisher works in an interesting way that most of you probably don't know. Basically, you're gonna get 8 geysers every 20 seconds, and each geyser is gonna do a certain amount of magic damage. At level 1, each geyser is gonna do between 28 and 42 magic damage. At level 2, it's gonna do between 56 to 84 magic damage, and once you get it up to tier 3, it's gonna do between 80 to 120 magic damage. So the total amount of damage that you actually get is way higher than the ability's description tells you. So yeah, don't trust the description. I'm not gonna, like, I haven't really written down in my notes what's the max number of damage that you can get out of this ability, so unfortunately you have to do the math by yourself. And then you also have the Infernal Portal, which is very underwhelming ability. You think that it's good because, you know, it's a teleport, and usually teleports are kinda nice to have around, but not for this guy, they're surprisingly bad. At tier 1 you can teleport an enemy by a pretty small amount actually, only 15 nodes. And you can teleport 4 enemies, and then you can teleport up to 6 enemies. And the thing is that the cooldown on this thing is 25 seconds. 25. That's just bad. That's a bad teleport ability. Don't use it unless unless the situation is completely dire and you really need that teleport. But 15 nodes is not even all that much. That's a surprisingly small amount of distance. But, you know, considering how slow enemies are in Vengeance, I guess 15 nodes is not terrible, but I just don't like the teleport. The Affliction is okay, the Lava Fisher can be handy, but the teleport, there's barely any uses. There's barely any use for this thing, and that's kind of unfortunate. But because of his pretty good DPS and the fact that he is not too expensive to get up, I'll consider him a kind of an okay tower. At least in my opinion, that is. Yeah, the Inferno Mage is kinda good. Like, I'll put him in B. He has good average DPS, his abilities are a little bit questionable, but the middle one is especially pretty useful. So I'll put him in B. He's kinda okay. Moving on to the Rocket Riders though. Rocket Riders, F you. Who decided that you were a good design? Whoever did it, well, I hope he burns in hell, because this tower is atrocious. Let's start off with its range. The radius is, even though it seems kind of okay, don't be fooled, because this tower is actually pretty awful. It deals between 70 to 101 explosive damage, meaning that it ignores 50% armor, and it shoots every 2.8 seconds, which seems kinda good, right? Well, yeah, but the DPS says otherwise. The DPS on this tower is kind of garbage, 30.5 DPS, which for artillery, I don't find it to be too good. It's kinda meh. But what really makes this tower really enraging is the cost. This tower is by far one of the more expensive towers in the game, and it's not the most expensive one, but it's definitely on the high end. Because, like, if it was worth the price, then this tower will be okay, but it's not. First of all, let's talk about the abilities, and decide where should we rank it. As you can see, we have minefields, which basically you're gonna toss this guy. Let me just move Travis out of the way. This guy is gonna toss a mine every now and then, and this mine will stay there and it will explode after a certain amount of time, or until an enemy runs over it. And it's gonna do 60, then 125, and then 190 physical damage. Yup, it is physical damage. It's very disappointing, and it costs 255 gold per upgrade. That's how bad this thing is. Then you have the Nitro Booster, which is actually kind of alright. It's a missile, basically an attack that has longer radius, and it deals slightly more damage. You know, 100 damage and then 180 explosive damage, so that's actually kind of a good ability. It's not terrible. At least, you know, for me that it's not. But then you also get this, the Detective Engine, which can be used against flying enemies. And basically it shoots out 5 debris, and each one of them deals 22 explosive damage. And then you can upgrade it even further, and it deals 32 damage. Which sounds good, and it kind of is, unless you, like, if you're doing an artillery only challenge, this one is actually kind of useful, because you can target it at flying enemies. Even if there's no ground enemies, he can still use it on a flying one, which is kind of cool. But being cool doesn't mean that you're a good tower. It's too expensive for what it does. The DPS is not that great, and most of its abilities are complete garbage. Besides the Nitro Boosters, they're kinda cool, but everything else is just bad. And don't let me start it on the mines, look at them. Most enemies are they're probably going to expire. There's a higher chance of them expiring rather than hitting an enemy, because the area that they affect is very small. Like, they have a very small hitbox. It's kinda like the mines from Bold in Farslayer. And he probably ended up designing them for the Orc army, because, let's be honest, Bolin is evil. Alright, I'm gonna stop. Let's just get back into the rating. Yeah, they're complete garbage. Into the D tier you go. Never use them. Just don't. Otherwise your life will become miserable. Moving on to the Dank Knights. Sorry, the Dark Knights. So yeah, the Dark Knights. The Dark Knights are awesome, bro. One of my favorite units ever created. Like, they're awesome. They have 312 HP at max level, and they have high armor, 75% armor. And that's quite a hefty amount of armor. And that means that they have 1248 efficient HP. That's a crap ton of HP to chop through. I mean, unless they're finding someone that deals magic damage, they're gonna be alive forever, man. And their real strength, like, their attack doesn't seem that good. 13 to 39, and they have the same attack rate as the orcs. But the thing is that they have, they're just better, man. Like, their average damage is pretty decent. It's good. On average, they will do 26. And even if you combine all the 3 orcs together, combining the 2 Dark Knights together, they're still better than 3 orcs. Basically, these guys have better DPS than the orcs, that's what I'm trying to say. And yeah, that's awesome. But what I really like about them is their abilities. Now, there's also this negative that you only get 2 of them instead of 3, but there's a reason, because they're very, very strong. As you saw there, that was their first ability, the Brutal Strike, which basically gives each one of them 2% chance to perform an insta-kill, which is pretty handy. However, after you get it up to tier 2, it's gonna get increased up to 4 and then 6%. And if both of them are attacking the same target, it means that you have a total of 12% chance to insta-kill. And with 1 second attack rate, it can happen pretty frequently. So that's very good. And they also have this Armor of Thorns, which is kind of their solution to the fact that there's only 2 of them. Basically, every time an enemy damages them, he will receive 45 physical damage back. It's not true damage, sadly. Imagine if it was, though. If they deal true damage with that Armor of Thorns, it would have been awesome. Just like the Dark Knight does from Legends of Kingdom Rush, but unfortunately that's not the case here. It is physical damage, but it's still very good. That's an incredible amount of extra damage. And if you have like regular enemies, they're gonna chop through them very easily. And then they also have this Impervious upgrade, which, as much as I love the Dark Knights, I have to admit it, it's not very good. Basically, they become invulnerable for, even though it says up to 3 shots, it's a time based, so for a few seconds they will basically not receive any damage. However, there is an issue with that. Whenever the enemy that's attacking them dies, none of the other enemies will be able to prioritize attacking the Dark Knights while they're behind their shields. And that's kind of bad. But for the most part, I would say don't buy Impervious, just stick to Armor of Thorns and you'll be Gucci. Like, you can buy the insta-kill if you want, but I would say for the most part the insta-kill is not quite as worth because it's pretty expensive. But the Dark Knights are just so durable and they do quite a decent amount of damage. They're one of the best barracks in my opinion. I would say definitely use them often, man. Use them. They're incredible. So, due to biasness, I'm gonna give them a slightly higher rating than they probably deserve. Yeah, these things are awesome. I would say A tier. Now, maybe some of you will put them a little bit lower or higher, but I feel like A tier is good enough. Like, sure, you get only 2 of them, but the frequency that they kill enemies with is ridiculous. The insta-kill, even though it's slightly overpriced, it is still useful to have around from time to time, especially if you're on some heroic and iron stages. It's a pretty good tower. I would say as a standalone tower, they're very good. A tier. But I don't think that they're quite there into the S tier. Moving on to Melting Furnace. Oh yeah, the Melting Furnace. Melting Furnace is kind of an questionable tower, to say the least. It is one of those towers that you just hate for some reason. And it's not like... and there is a good one, actually. Because of its statistics. Let's take a look. It has 45 to 55 explosive damage. However, there is one interesting part that most people don't know about. The Melting Furnace can ignore 75% armor instead of 50%. So it should be better, right? Well, yeah, but because of that they had to make the attack speed atrocious. Every 4 seconds. 4 seconds. Not 3, not 3.5, 4 seconds. Making this tower by far one of the... I would say the slowest attacking tower ever created. Just 4 seconds? Bruh. That's just awful. But it does stun enemies for a brief moment, which is kinda cool. But coolness doesn't mean that it's good. Alright? Now, on average, the damage from this tower is atrocious. We're talking about 12.5 damage up in here. Do you know how little 12.5 artillery damage is? That's so bad. And, like, take for example the artillery in Origins. Even though it dealt true damage, it still was very effective as far as DPS goes. So yeah, I'm just very, very disappointed by this tower. It is bad, and I would not recommend you to use it whatsoever. Just stay away from it. But, alright, we haven't ended. We have to talk about the range. The range is kinda meh. You know, it's not really long. It's not long at all. It's kind of short, to be honest. Even though it says it's average, I don't find it to be average. I find it to be short, at least in my opinion. Maybe it is really average, but... and it just doesn't feel like average to me. I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of a weird feeling. Maybe it's because I really hate this tower, but... whatever it is, I just don't really like it. And, yeah. Let's get on with the abilities. For the abilities, you have the White Hot Coals, which are... they can basically do up to 200 total damage. to the enemies that are staying on them. You know, they have to stay on them for quite a few seconds in order to take the maximum damage, but the AoE is good enough, so I suppose it is nice. And then you can increase the damage all the way up to 320. But it is physical damage, it's not true damage or magical damage, it's physical damage for some reason. And yeah, then you also have the abrasive heat, which is gonna increase the damage of nearby towers by 15 and then 30%. Which sounds good, but when you realize that the range is so short, it's kinda hard to make it useful. At least that's how I felt with this tower. It's just hard to make this ability useful. Like, you may be thinking, well, just put it in a spot where you can affect a lot of towers. Well, yeah, but that spot may not be very effective for the tower's damage. Like, you're usually stuck between this decision. Do I want this tower for support or for damage? And usually you'll pick the support because, let's be honest, otherwise this tower is kinda bad. And then you also have the, you know, what would you call it? The fuel upgrade. Basically, this one allows the melting furnace to get increased attack speed, doubling its attack speed actually. Now it attacks every 2 seconds, but the thing is that the duration is 10 seconds, meaning that you only get 5 attacks in, which it's not a lot. Sure, the stunning will be more consistent, but 10 seconds, that's nothing. And the thing is that the cooldown is 30 seconds, so yeah. Overall, this tower sucks. Don't use it, but it still has its moments, apparently. Like, as much as I wanna hate it, I can't ignore the good sides on this tower. The stunning is nice, the extra damage could be helpful from time to time. As much as I want to put you into the lowest tier possible, I guess I'm gonna put you... I don't know. Well, let's get back into the tier list and see what I've decided to do with this atrocity of a tower. Yeah, this thing is kind of atrocious, but, you know, considering the fact that it can stun and it can boost your tower, so I'm gonna bump him up to C. You get lucky there. Even though he ignores 75% armor, he shoots so slowly that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that you ignore 75% armor when you're complete garbage. Moving on to the Mausoleum. Woohoo! Alright then, now we finally got up to a really good tower. The flippin' Mausoleum, man. This thing is very, very good. Now, let's check it out, shall we? First of all, it has kind of a small radius. You know, I think it's a little bit bigger than the melting furnace, but not quite sure. So yeah, that's good. It has an okay radius. But it has average attack rate, which is kind of unusual for a mage tower, you know, only the... we've seen the Necromancer and the Wild Magus, but it's kind of rare to see a mage tower that's not slow or very slow. So yeah, that's interesting. And the damage is not bad. 52 to 78 with all of the upgrades. That's pretty decent. That means that the average amount of damage that this tower will be able to pull off is 44.8, which, you know, it's not bad. It's pretty decent. For a mage tower, that is. It's pretty good. Still, I feel like, the, what would you call it? The Infernal Mage has a little bit of a better DPS, which is kind of interesting, but the Mausoleum can hold up to 3 Spectres, which is kind of like the Archdruid Henge and the Archmage, pretty much. So you can do some burst damage and potentially kill low tier enemies with it. It's kind of nice. Then you also have these gargoyles, which are just amazing. Like, their stats are incredible, man. Incredible. We're talking about a lot of stuff. 585 efficient HP. That's how much each one of these bad boys have. And they're not super expensive. They're only 212 gold, which, believe it or not, is not all that much. It is a pretty reasonable amount of gold, if I do say so myself. However, their damage is kind of iffy, 16 to 24. Now, I'm not quite sure what their attack rate is, so I can't confirm how much DPS you're gonna get out of these guys, but let's say that it's okay. Let's say that we have a decent amount of physical damage going on from these guys. Now, you also can get the Spectral Communion, which is gonna increase the maximum amount of specters that you can hold for your burst attack. And it can go from 4 then to 5. So that's good. You can have up to 5 specters at once. So you're gonna do pretty decent amount of burst damage, which is good. But their most outstanding ability is Possession. Possession is ridiculously good. It possesses an enemy for 10 seconds who fights on your side for you. Doesn't matter the enemy. It could be a low tier enemy. It could be flippin' high tier enemy, some big threat like Sorcerer, Demolishers, etc. And that's awesome. And the cooldown starts off as being pretty slow, 23 seconds, but once you upgrade it, it starts getting reduced by 3 seconds and then additional 3 seconds. So at tier 2, you're gonna get a possession every 20 seconds, while at tier 3, you're gonna get possession every 17 seconds, which is very good. Yeah, this tower is amazing. I would say definitely one of the better towers out there. It's not quite as broken as some people make it up to be. It still has its flaws, like it doesn't do all that well against certain enemies. It doesn't do well against magic resistant enemies. The possession is good, but you can easily miss it, or it's hard to make it useful because you don't really control which enemy the mausoleum will pick. Unless you micromanage your way with it, which, you know, it's pretty hard to do. So yeah, because of that I can't quite put the mausoleum into the best tier, but he's still a pretty darn good tower and he definitely deserves a good rating. Yeah, the mausoleum is easy S tier. Great tower all around. Like, it's one of the best mages in this game ever created. It has a lot of burst, it can do a lot of burst damage, it has blockers, it can possess enemies for you. It's wonderful. What's there to say? S tier. Moving on to the Goblin ranks though. So yeah, the Goblin ranks. They're actually one of those towers that a lot of people just underestimate. This tower is actually good. Yeah, I said it, Goblin ranks are good. If you use them correctly, that is. If you don't use them properly, then yeah, they are complete garbage. But in the right hands, they can be pretty bulky and good tower. Let's start with their stats. They have a little bit longer range, you know. Their range is okay, you know, it's not as good as the Shadow Archer, but it's definitely better than some of the other archers. I would say it's about average. It has 27 to 51 physical damage, which it can use every 1.4 seconds, which means that its DPS is surprisingly low, 27.8. Yeah, that's pretty bad. However, it can hit multiple enemies, its rivals in a lane, which makes it hard to use because you need to line up enemies properly in order to hit them. And if you hit, you can potentially hit multiple enemies with it, so actually the DPS is way higher than the number shows, if you use it properly, that is. And you can also target enemies on the way back, so you can potentially double the damage on a single target. If you, as I said, if you use it correctly. And usually the best way to use Goblin ranks is if you combine them with barracks. But even if you combine them with barracks, they still need to be in a good position in order to work properly. But since I've played with them for a long time, I know how to use them quite well. Now let's get on with their abilities and to move on. What do we have? Well, we have the bigger ranks, which is kind of a mech ability. Basically, it's an attack that covers bigger. It has a bigger hitbox and used between 27 to 49, then 32 to 60, and at last it's gonna do between 43 to 81 physical damage. And it happens every 12 seconds, so it occurs pretty frequently, I suppose. And the hitbox of the bigger rank is actually, you know, big. It's not a lie. They haven't lied to me. It's surprisingly big, and that's good, because that means it will make it easier for the Goblin rank to hit multiple enemies, which is always a positive. Then we also have the headbang, which is gonna give every one of your shots 5, 10, and then 15% chance to stun an enemy for quite a decent amount of time. You know, it's not like a super long stun, it's 1.25 seconds stun, I think. Maybe it's 1.2 seconds flat. I don't remember. I think it was 1.2, if now that I think about it. So yeah, it's an okay stun, you know, it's nothing phenomenal. But if you use it correctly, you can be stunning quite a few enemies, which is nice. And then you also have the Angry Bees, which is basically an AoE attack that deals up to 120, 230, and then 345 damage, which, yeah, it's not that great. It's kinda mech, to be honest, because you need to keep enemies in the bees, because it's kinda like a damage over time ability. So the longer enemies stay into the bees, the more damage they will take. But, yeah, I don't know, I just don't find its ability to be very useful for the most part. Even though there is an achievement for it, which is very hard to get, I just don't use this ability whatsoever. Usually just stick up to the headbangs, maybe get a bigger rank in case you need it, but for the most part you probably will not. So just stick to that and you will be fine. like, besides their abilities being kind of questionable, this tower is actually kind of good, so I'm gonna put it in... I don't know, I guess I'll put it in this tier. Now, most we are gonna put them in D, but but I'm a good player with them, so I'm gonna put them in B, because they are pretty useful, and you need to start learning how to use them. Sure, they require a lot of practice in order to be used properly, but if with the right micro and the right player, these things can become a B tier easily. I want to put them in A, but I don't think that they're that great. I'm still gonna put them in B, because in some situations they can easily replace artillery, which is pretty good, so yeah, B tier it is. Moving on to the Boneflingers though. Oh man, Boneflingers. The OP ones. They're awesome, man. 1, very cheap. 2, high damage. You don't need to know anything more. That's all you really need to know in order to understand the sheer power of these guys. Well, alright then, let's start talking about them. Stop with that. As you can see, the only issue so far is the range. The range is very short, and that's kind of problematic. But they make up for it with their attack. They deal between 15 to 37 physical damage, and they shoot every 0.6 seconds, which means that their DPS is surprisingly high, and it's not bad. But, however, you can make it even better, because as you can see, this guy has way bigger attack, and you'll see why later, but originally their DPS is around 44.8, which is pretty solid. But then there's this upgrade, got Milk, which is gonna increase the base attack by 5 points, then by an additional points, and then even more. Like, look at that, 15 extra points of attack, which is gonna skyrocket the DPS all the way up to 70 per second. 70 physical damage per second is nothing to mess around with. That's a pretty solid amount of physical damage. And then you also get these guys, the Walking Dead, which are gonna get summoned every 16 seconds, and you're gonna get the skeleton that's kinda meh. But then every 12 seconds you're gonna spawn another skeleton that's a little bit better. As you can see, these guys 116 HP, 15 to 25 physical damage, with 1 second attack rate, meaning that they have, on average they're gonna do 20 damage, which is pretty good. The only issue is that they have no armor, even though it looks like they have some armor. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have one, which, you know, it's kind of weird, but that's the way it is. And then you can also summon this guy, Bonum, the good old Bonum, who can just bone everybody. Not in a sexual way, of course, but you know, the joke has to be made. And yeah, this guy is cool. He is definitely a strong asset to your team. Basically, he has decent stats, but not really. Like, he doesn't have any armor, and he only has 390 HP. And 390 HP is a pretty bad amount. It's not like great, but it's still good. The thing is that his DPS is pretty good. He has a 23.3 average DPS on melee, and he has 24 DPS on, what would you call it, when he's ranged. So definitely use him in range. But as you can see, as good as Boneflingers are, they still have their issues. They're still, they're not a tower that can solo literally everything. As you can see, we're struggling. And yeah, unfortunately, I think we're gonna die here. So yeah, don't think that Boneflingers are ridiculous, but they can be. It was just, I used the bad hero. If you use the proper hero, man, these guys wreck stuff up. You can just get infinite amount of skeletons at one point. It's ridiculous. So yeah, besides this bad gameplay, let's get into the ranking. Let's ignore this. Just remove it. It's awful. Remove it. Bastier, man. Broken. Like, sure, they don't do any sort of true or magic damage, but then again, there's heroes that do magic damage and true damage, so just use heroes that do magic and true damage, and this tower can pretty much solo everything, right? Yep, that's pretty much it. They're one of the cheapest towers in the game, and they're wonderful. They provide I can make an entire video dedicated to how good these things are, but, you know, the video has been already kind of long, so let's move on to the other tower, which is the Elite Harasser. Oh man, the Elite Harassers. These guys are pretty cool. Not gonna lie, they are pretty dope. First and foremost, as you can see, their rally choke point is a little bit wider than usual. in comparison to like other barracks, this tower has a pretty large choke point. Rally point. I messed up with the terms, my bad. So yeah, that's good. But how good is this tower? Well, it is surprisingly good. I was even able to beat this level with just elite characters, even though this is not gonna be the whole clip probably, because, you know, we're not trying to make the video super insanely long like with Duke, so yeah. But just letting you know, I did it with Olok and these guys, which was pretty impressive. That's impossible mode, bro. And they wreck stuff up, which is quite impressive. You just need some magic damage here and there, because they're purely physical damage. Now let me just talk about their stats. They have 286 HP and no armor, so they only have 286 HP, which sounds kinda bad. But they can dodge some attacks occasionally, because they have one ability that pretty much makes them very hard to kill, let's just say that. And the ability that I'm talking about is this thing, the backstab. Basically, they get 40% chance to dodge melee attacks, and they will deliver between 10 to 15 physical damage. And then, if you increase it up to tier 2, they're gonna counter the attack doing 20 to 30 physical damage, and they'll have 50% chance to dodge. So they are, if we take that into consideration, their efficient HP is 572, which is not bad for someone who has no armor. That's quite impressive. So yeah, but the main thing is that you want to keep them in range. Like, their damage is pretty high, 27 to 38, but surprisingly their range damage is slightly lower than their melee, which is kind of interesting. Their range damage is 36.11 on average, like their average DPS will be somewhere like this, or something like this, and their melee damage will be 40.6, so that's kind of interesting. Maybe you want to use them more as a, you know, as melee units than range, but that will be stupid because they have very long range attacks, and that's what they're mostly known for. Look at that range, that barrage. Speaking of the barrage, let's talk about this ability, the barrage ability. It is pretty dope. Basically, they shoot a volley of arrows, 5 arrows, just like the Twilight harassers, and you do 16 to 24 damage with each arrow. Now keep in mind, it is physical damage, it's not true damage or anything, but it recharges pretty quickly, every 12 seconds in fact, which is not a very long time until you get it back. You can usually shred through low tier enemies with this ability with ease, which is quite nice, but, you know, it's not like super broken, because, you know, it deals mostly physical damage, which means that against armored enemies like those over there, we're gonna be struggling quite a bit, which is sad, but, you know, that's the way it is. However, the damage on this thing gets pretty high. You can, at max level, it can do between 48 to 72 damage per arrow, which is pretty good amount of damage, to be honest. Like, sure, it is physical damage and all, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad ability. It's still a pretty good one, and yeah, you should definitely use it. It's pretty good. But then they also have the Fury of the Twilight, which basically makes them so when they die, they have a small chance of becoming berserk, making them very strong for a short period of time. And basically, their stats are not that bad, they're actually surprisingly good. So yeah, basically, they have, when they're in berserk stage, they don't have a lot of health, let's just say that. They have a little bit more health than usual, I think. Yeah, they don't have all that much health, but the thing is that their DPS is pretty darn high. Their average damage is whopping 80. Like, 80 average damage, that's some high numbers there, man. 80 DPS, that's quite solid. So yeah, elite harassers are definitely a good tower, definitely use them. They're pretty good. Even though we're losing, it doesn't matter, because we're jumping back into the, you know, the tier list, so we don't have to watch this miserable defeat. And yes, I lied to you that I beat in this level. I beat it with Merlin. You think that this is possible with all luck? No chance in hell. Yeah, elite harasser is okay. I'm gonna put them right next to these guys. You know, they're pretty equal level. Sure, one of them is more durable, the other deals more damage, but I don't know. Elite harassers are good, but I don't say that they're S tier quite yet. Like, you know what? Maybe nah. You're staying in A. You're staying in A. That's the way it is. Moving on to the Orc Shaman. Oh yeah, the Shaman. What a disappointment of a tower he was. But I guess we have to get through him. So yeah, basically, he has pretty good radius, which you know is good, but you know, that's not the main issue that he has. Range is not one of his issues, so that's good at least. However, he has a plethora of other issues. As you can see, look at that damage gap. 38 to 209 magic damage. That's a very wide gap. And it doesn't help that he has a pretty slow attack rate every 2.3 seconds. Which means that his average damage is 53.7. Which may seem like a decent amount at first. But it's hard to determine his average DPS because look at that gap. You never know, maybe you'll get more, maybe you'll get less. This guy is confusing, and he's not really meant to be used all that much because, like, even though he stuns with his basic attacks for a split second, it doesn't help out all that much. I mean, look at us. If this was a good tower, we would have been surviving, but no, we're dying. We're dying miserably. So yeah, because of that, he's not... I mean, he's not a terrible tower, but he's not a good tower either. He's kind of meh. Let's check out his abilities. First of all, we have the healing root, which is gonna give your guys regeneration for 20 HP, then 40, and then 60. It has 16 seconds cooldown, so it takes a while. It takes a while, that's for sure. But the interesting thing is that you need at least 2 enemies in radius in order to, you know, activate it. And they need to be below 50% HP, so that's quite a few restrictions in order to be activated. So I don't know how I feel about that. But it's still okay, you know. It's not terrible, but I barely use it. Then we also have the Meteor Shard, which is gonna summon 4 meteors that do between 18 to 33 damage per hit. Then it's gonna increase the amount to 5 meteors, doing between 28 and 52 damage. And at tier 3, it's gonna be 6 meteors that do between 35 and 65 damage. Now, the thing is that it is magical damage. It's not physical or true damage, it is magical damage. How does the meteor deal magical damage? I'll never know, but it deals. And then we also have the static shock, which is garbage. But also, forgot to mention, the meteors have 20 seconds cooldown, so they take a while to come back. So yeah, they're not too great. I mean, look at them. Does that look good to you? That was a terrible aim. Yeah, that's another issue with this ability. Sometimes it can have an awful aim, so be careful about that. Then we have the static shock, which is gonna create a small AoE around its attack, dealing between 3 to 13 damage, 6 to 26, and 10 to 38 damage. Which, it sounds good, it sounds like the Tesla, right? No, it's not, look at it. Look at that. Does that static shock helps out? I don't think so. Like, sure, the AoE, like, if you're looking at it, it looks kinda big. But it's not. It's actually pretty bad. Like, the extra damage that you get is just not good enough. It deals so little damage. And it's not true damage. Again, I think it's magical damage, so yeah. This tower, in my opinion, is very underwhelming, and it should not have a good place on our tier list. I'm sorry for the few people who think that this tower has its place in this game, but to me, it's just a complete another disappointment. Yeah, the Orc Shaman is complete garbage. Into the D tier, like, such a high damage difference, slow attack rate, very expensive. He's kind of like the Goblin ranks, but worse. Sorry, Rocket Riders. I messed up the names there. He's kind of like the Rocket Riders, but even worse, which is just disappointing. Moving on to the Grim Cemetery. Oh man, the Grim Cemetery. Well, first of all, it looks pretty dope having all that many zombies up in here, but it's not quite as good as I want it to be. Sorry guys, but these zombies, they are not that great. For one, they don't really have a respawn rate, as you can see, but basically this tower works differently than the other barracks. If you kill an enemy in its radius, it's gonna spawn a zombie. Or if you don't, after a certain amount of time, a zombie will be spawned randomly, which is kind of bad because as you can see, no rally point. What's the point of having a barrack if you can't control them? That's the whole point of having a barrack, to create a choke point, but with these guys, it's so hard. Unless you spam them mindlessly like I am doing right now, for the sake of the showcase. And yeah, it's kinda meh, to be honest. Like, look at their stats. They have 312 HP, and they have 4 to 11 damage. So on average, let's assume that they have 1 second attack rate. I think that's what their attack rate was. They'll do 7.5 damage. That's a bad amount of damage. That's very bad. And even after you give them this upgrade, which is the Zombie X Muscle Gain, which is supposed to make them better, it doesn't make them all that much better, unfortunately. Now they have 390 HP, so I guess that's a decent improvement, and their damage on average now will be 10 damage. That's very bad. But they're meant to be good blockers, but like sure you have the health, but the lack of armor really makes them vulnerable to literally anything. So yeah, that's a little bit of a problem. But they also have an interesting other property. They have the cold grip, cold grip. My bad, I messed up my pronunciation again. Basically, this thing it slows down enemies in an area by 30% every 15 seconds, and then after you get to tier 2, it's gonna be the cooldown will be reduced up to 12 seconds, but the slowdown will be increased significantly, all the way up to 60%. So it's actually very beneficial to get it up to tier 2. So definitely make sure you get this one up to tier 2. And yeah, they also have the bloated corpses, which just sounds disgusting. And basically every few seconds, which I'm not quite sure what the cooldown is, like, not quite sure when a zombie pops up. Basically the green ones, the ones that are glowing green, those are the bloated corpses. I'm gonna ignore the damage because it's listed incorrectly. The correct damage goes up like this. Basically on that they do 15 explosive damage, and they make other enemies suffer 15 poison damage. Which, sure, poison damage is technically true damage, but 15 damage? That's like nothingness. And when you get it up to tier 2, the explosion gets significant boost. Instead of 15 damage, now you do 60 damage. I'm not quite sure if I'm pretty sure it's physical damage actually. So yeah, it's not very efficient. But the poison damage is still the same, 15 seconds. So yeah, these guys in general are not great. Sure, you can have some fun just spamming them on an easy level like Kudos Farmlands and just watching your army of darkness just take over everything, but in a real game, they are complete another crap, let's just say that. Well, I guess they have some uses, but the lack of rally point really turns me off, so yeah. I can't give them a good rating, unfortunately. I mean, yeah, they die very easily, but you can get a lot of them, pretty fast, quite frequently. And like, sure, but you can't move them, and you can't really choose when they spawn randomly. Shmeh. You know what? Because you can get so many of them, I'm gonna put them in C. They're cheap. They have okay-ish abilities, and they can block for quite a while. So I'm gonna put them in C. Rotten Forest, on the other hand. Oh, Rotten Forest, another disappointment of a tower. And it's sad because I really love its design. It's beautiful. It's pretty dope to look at it, but... I mean, from where should I begin? An insanely short radius, 5 physical damage. Yeah, it's not explosive damage or anything, it's physical damage. Even though this tower is meant to be quote-unquote an artillery tower because it damages everything in its radius, it's pretty bad. Physical damage. I never heard artillery to have physical damage before until now. And yeah, there's a lot of other issues, but the good thing is at least that it attacks very fast, every 0.4 seconds, which is pretty fast. And basically the DPS it's somewhere, on average it's gonna do about 12.5 DPS, which it's kinda meh. It's not great. Unless you have multiple enemies in its radius, then it's actually kind of alright, but even then it's still kinda bad. I know that it has like this passive slowdown ability where it can slow down enemies by, I believe, 40% when it's at tier 3 and 4. So that's good, but it doesn't make up for the lack of damage lost. Like, the lack of damage is really what kills this tower, along with the lack of radius. Like, none of the towers have such a short radius. Not even the barracks, which is very disappointing. And yeah, as far as the abilities goes, they're not that great. You have these treants that spawn every 10 seconds or so, somewhere around 10 seconds, and they die very easily. Yeah, look at that. Look at how fast its health drained. He was barely on screen and he died. And that's pretty much the case here. They just respawn every now and then. I suppose I can give them that they're kind of consistent, After they die, they respawn usually pretty fast. But then again, they're not that great. They don't have any armor, they're not as bulky as the treants used to be in the original Kingdom Rush, which is just a huge disappointment. Then we also have the Roots of Evil, which is a Rat of the Forest ripoff, but if Rat of the Forest was balanced. Basically, you can stun between 2 to 5 enemies for 3 seconds and then 6 seconds. That's it. It's as simple as that, and it's as bad as it sounds. And then you also have Fog of Despair, which, it's despair, but not in a way that we're killing enemies, we're just Basically, you have 5 and then 10% chance. Basically, every enemy who is in the mist has 10% chance to miss their attack, which 10%, like what? That's so little. I don't even want to talk about it because I'm getting pissed off. And the lack of range really shows here. I mean, look at these guys. It doesn't even hit the bottom sub lane. Like what? Rotten Forest, I'm sorry, but you have to be kind of at the bottom, man. I don't want to do it, guys, but like facts speaks for them. Facts speak for themselves, don't they? And unfortunately, the facts say that you're an atrocity that shouldn't have been created. Or if you were created, at least it could have been much better. Like if you dealt true damage, if you dealt like 10 true damage per 0.4 seconds, that would be incredible. But unfortunately, you're a garbage, and we'll have to toss you in the trash can. I'm sorry, Rotten Forest, but that's the way it is. Yeah. Sorry, mate. I really like your design. It's a shame that you weren't as good as your profile pic. If you were as good as if you were as good as I wanted you to be, you could be easily high up there with the other towers, but the fact that you do physical damage in the short radius is just atrocious. I'm sorry, Rotten Forest, but that's the way it is. Moving on to Deep Devil's Reef. Yeah, the Deep Devil's Reef. Now this tower, man, is good. I mean, it's a magic tower and a barrack tower in one. That's a perfect combination because you have both good physical damage and you have you have also good magic damage and physical damage. That's awesome. It's unlike the Mausoleum where you have to wait until tier 4 to get the gargoyles. Here, you can get the fishes as soon as you purchase the tower. It is quite amazing. It is very good. Now, let's talk about this statistic. As you can see, it has kind of a short radius, which is a little bit problematic. But that doesn't matter because it has a good enough attack to kind of, make it good, I suppose. As you can see, it has 44 to 132 magic damage, that's the gap that it has. It attacks every 1.5 seconds, which means that the average DPS is actually pretty good. 58.7 in fact, that's a pretty decent amount. I'm not gonna lie, I'm quite impressed with the amount of damage that this guy can pull off. But also we have the units, the fishes. And the fishes at level 4 are surprisingly good. They have 208 HP. They have a decent amount of armor. I don't remember the exact percentage, but I remember their efficient HP was 244 efficient HP they have. That's how much they have. Which, is not all that much. It's kind of meh, but whatever. It is what it is. Yeah, 244. I mean, what are you expecting? They have only very low armor, so it was kind of expected. But once you get the Chosen of the Sea, that's when they become very, very bulky. Once you get it, they have 258 HP, their damage gets increased a little bit, and they get more armor, and they get a pretty significant amount of armor boost. To give you an example, they go from 244 efficient HP total to 344. That's 100 extra points. That's not bad, that's a pretty decent increase. I'm not gonna lie, it's almost 50% better. And it's not that expensive, and it's only a tier 1, so you can easily afford it, which is very nice. However, I forgot to mention their DPS, my bad. Well, before you get the Chosen of the Sea, their DPS is only 10. They only have 10 DPS when they're in melee, and their range DPS is 12.7. With the Chosen of the Sea upgrade, then their damage becomes pretty decent. They do 13 damage per second when they're melee, and they have 18.3 average DPS when they're in range. While they're using their ranged attack. That's what I'm trying to say here. So yeah, that's pretty good. These guys are definitely bulky enough. They do a lot of damage. They're definitely a little bit better than the gargoyles in my opinion, just because of the sheer power that they have. Plus they have ranged attacks that they can shoot their spells pretty frequently, which is very good positive. They also have the net throw, which, to be honest, it's not as useful as you think it is. Basically, it's meant to be a stun. They're gonna toss a net and they're gonna stun an enemy for 2 seconds and then 4 seconds. Which sounds good, but the issue is that after the enemy gets stunned, it's kind of like the time-lapse ability from the High Oven Mage, where you will not be able to damage the enemies that are inside the nets, which is kind of problematic if you ask me. So yeah, it's good and bad at the same time. And it happens pretty frequently though, so I suppose that's the positive part. And then you also have the perfect storm, which is gonna happen every 20 seconds, which, you know, it's not bad. 20 seconds, it's kind of iffy, but okay-ish cooldown. And it's gonna do 70 damage over 5 seconds. Now, the damage is magical damage, so keep that in mind. So it's gonna do 70, then 140, then 210 extra magic damage, which is not bad. That's actually kind of decent. Yeah, it is pretty good. And the cool thing is that the perfect storm shoots 3 times. Basically, each shot is gonna deliver a certain portion of the damage, or in this case, a third of the damage to be more exact. And that's pretty good because each shot from the perfect storm stuns, similar to the basic attacks of the Orc Shaman. As you can see here, this enemy got stunned quite a few times, and that was kind of helpful. But as you can see with the nets, we can't target the enemies. He's just kind of there. He just sits there and waits until he gets free, so he can start destroying us once again. I would say this tower is pretty darn close to being broken, in my opinion. Like, you can solo so many levels with the fish tower. It's amazing. Like, Deep Devil's Reef, definitely one of the better mages out there. If not one of, like, he's definitely one of the best mages out there, but is he broken? I would say no. But it's definitely a good tower, so it deserves a pretty decent rating, right? Well, let's get back to the tier list and rank it, shall we? This may come as a surprise, but I'm gonna put them in S. Like, they're pretty good. They're kind of like the Mausoleum. Only instead of having to wait until tier 4 and then buy the units, you get the units right from the get-go. And sure, they start off as being pretty weak, but later on, they get pretty darn bulky. And they do both good magical and physical damage, so it's a perfect tower. I won't say that it's broken, because, you know, the units can still die quite easily against some enemies, and the fact that the perfect storm is kind of underwhelming, I'm gonna put them in S. Moving on to the Blazing Gem. Holy goodness, Batman, the Blazing Gem. Yeah, this tower is very, very, extremely good. Let's just say that. First of all, as you can see, his radius, even though it doesn't seem that good, he doesn't have to be. And you'll see why later, because you can see it's a laser that gets incremental damage, so the longer it stays on the same target, the more damage it's gonna do. That's awesome. That's a pretty wonderful combo, to say the least. However, it is still kind of iffy, because, well, not really, it's not. It's just, the number that I'm gonna give you is basically how much average damage it's gonna do when it's at its max power, minus the abilities, that is. On average, without this ability, Gem of Amplification, which basically makes it so it can gain more power. If we don't include it, it's gonna do on average 163.7. Like, that's the DPS on this thing. Sure, it is magical damage, so heavy magic resistant enemies like these are gonna be a struggle to our little tower, but everything else, melted, man. That's an incredible damage. And with the Gem of Amplification, when it's powered up, it deals 280.7 average DPS. That's ridiculousness. Ridiculousness in its finest. The single target damage on this thing, the single target damage on this Blazing Gem is ridiculous. By far one of the strongest abilities ever created. Period. Well, there's also this thing, which is the Destructor Ray, which is gonna give it an insta-kill every 25 seconds, then every 23 seconds, and then every 20 seconds. So yeah, that's pretty decent, right? Yeah, it's not terrible, 20-second insta-kill. It's not like the shortest insta-kill in the game, but it is pretty short, so that's good. You're gonna be getting some good occasional insta-kills every now and then, which is very nice. And then you also have the Unstable Power, which basically what it makes it do is, whenever the Blazing Gem kills an enemy, the enemy explodes and he deals between 32 to 38 magic damage. Yeah, it is magical damage, it's not physical or true damage, it is magical damage. But once you get up to level 2, the damage is increased pretty significantly. It goes from 32 to 38 to 63 to a whopping 77. That's a pretty decent explosion if I do say so myself. And the AoE is not that bad either. Now, I would say this tower can pretty much solo everything. Even, like, the only thing that could stop the Blazing Gem is a big horde of magic-resistant enemies. That's the only thing that this tower will probably die to. But everything else will just become the dead. Let me tell you that. It is quite outstanding. This tower has it all. A lot of damage, some area damage, insta-kills. Like, what more do you want from this tower? The only thing that they could have done is dealt some true damage, but if it dealt true damage, man, this tower will be even more broken than Ice Cold. Well, maybe not more broken than Ice Cold, but still. Imagine if it did, though. But anyway, I would say that this tower is definitely one of the most broken towers. So yeah, it definitely goes into you know what. Oh my god. Beat Bass. Just straight into the Bass tier you go. I know that some of you may say Blazing Gem is not that good, but come on. You gotta admit the power of this creature. It is wonderful. And moving on to the second to last tower, Wicked Sisters. Yeah, the Wicked Sisters. A tower that a lot of people seem to underestimate very heavily. Because this tower, in reality, to be honest, it is quite a good. It's not a tower that you should be underestimating. Ignore the fact we're losing to quite a few units here, that doesn't matter. That's because this level is rough. It's not an easy one, as you can see. We're doing it with 2 Wicked Sisters and we're surviving quite well. But, you know. Anyway, let's move on to the tower. As you can see, it has a kind of a weird radius. It has a rally point, right? Which means that it's supposed to be a different one. It's not meant to be like your typical tower, typical mage tower, where it's just gonna just stay there and do its damage. Nope, that's not gonna happen. What is gonna happen is that you have to move her around. But the thing is that she has multiple ways to attack enemies. She has the poison, which deals true damage, and it deals quite a bit of... It can do quite a lot. It can do up to 165 true damage over the course of one shot, which, you know, it's pretty good. Basically, the way it works, it's based around certain ticks. It has 3 ticks, and each tick deals a portion of the damage, which is pretty good. Like, the damage out of this tower is pretty nice, but it also has this basic attack, which is the Purple Blast, which deals pure magic damage, and as you can see, 85 to 200. That's quite a wild gap, if I do say so myself, but it is decent. Like, if we're talking about the average damage, it's surprisingly not that bad. It's 57.5, and that's not bad. You know, it's not great or anything, but it's not like a terrible... You know, I was expecting it to be even worse than the Orc Shaman, but it's not. Even though it has slower attack rate, it has a little bit more consistency than him. Even if it's just by a little bit. It's still more consistent than the other one, which is always a positive. Now, this tower is hard to use, don't get me wrong, it is very tough. You have to move the witch around quite a bit in order to maximize her usefulness. So it's not an easy process. No, it's not. It takes quite a while to get used to the witches, or the Wicked Sisters as they're properly called, but I just like calling them witches because, I mean, that's what they are, really. So yeah, but after some time passes, you'll eventually figure out how to use them. The thing is that they have very good abilities. They have the Frogification, which is gonna turn an enemy into a frog for 6 seconds, and you can just tap on him and he will die. And the cooldown is only 22 seconds, and then you can reduce it even lower, up to 18 seconds, making it one of the shorter insta-kills in the whole Kingdom Rush franchise, which is very good. I mean, it's just like the Polymorph with an extra step. That's pretty much what it is. So yeah, that's cool. But also it has the Hex Totem, which is gonna remove any sort of magical abilities from an enemy for 10 seconds, in a pretty decent area, I suppose. It's not like a gigantic area, but it's good enough, alright? It's good enough. And it's kinda nice, but it's really hard to look after every single witch. That's kinda the issue. It's not an easy process. You have to be careful at all times, because the thing is that if you don't kill the frog for the 6 seconds, guess what? The enemy is gonna turn back, and you're probably going to die. So yeah, because of that, you have to be very vigilant with your Wicked Sister. You can't just leave her there and let her be. You have to just micro-manage a lot. And for the totem, as I said, it lasts for 10 seconds and it has 15 seconds cooldown, so it's pretty good. It's good, not gonna lie, it is quite nice to have around. And then the other thing, the Nimbus 4000 basically just increases her rally point, because originally her rally point is very small, so it's pretty much a necessity. Whenever you get her, just get this upgrade, man, because you're gonna need it. You're gonna need that extra rally point for sure. For shiznit. But yeah, overall I would say this tower is good. It's not as useful as some of the other towers, but it's a tower with a specific purpose, you know? It's meant to be good, it's meant to destroy tough enemies, it's meant to get them out of the building. And it does its job pretty darn well. It's just hard to, when you have more than two of them. It's really hard to just take a look at which enemy is been polymorphed and which one isn't. You know, it's kinda hard, but once you get used to it, man, these towers become very good. I would say they're just incredible. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get back to the rating. I'm gonna put them in B, to be honest. Like, they're not terrible, even though most people make them up to be, but that's because they have a singular purpose, and that's to deal with tough enemies. But unlike the Golden Longbow and the Arcane and the Shadow Archer to some extent, this tower can deal with a lot of enemies. Pretty much any type of enemy you want, if you switch to the poison. And it has the fastest insta-kill in the game. Well, second fastest insta-kill, because the first one belongs to both Sorcerer and Arcane, because their insta-kill can be reduced up to 16 seconds, but this tower is not bad. In my opinion, it's pretty decent. And last but not least, we also have the War Zeppelin. Oh yeah, the War Zeppelin, the last tower on our list. Well, this tower is quite a nice addition to the game, I suppose. It's not like an incredible tower, but it's not a terrible one either. It is kind of an iffy, because in this game, artillery seems to be pretty bad. And it kind of is, not gonna lie. The main issue is the explosion radius on this tower. The AoE is kind of small, and it doesn't really feel good enough. And it really isn't. That's the issue. It doesn't have a great AoE, but it deals quite a decent amount of damage, between 55 to 110 on an average attack rate, which in this case is 1.36 seconds, meaning that its DPS is 60.7, which is actually pretty good. So yeah, it looks good on purpose, on the surface, but in reality I don't find this to be all that great. Like, it still has its struggles, like heavy armored enemies, they can easily just get past the War Zeppelin and annihilate him. So yeah, you can't just think that this tower can take down everything, because it cannot. You still need to support it occasionally with barracks or maybe some magic tower every now and then. So yeah, that's kind of the issue that I have with it, but the other issue is its abilities. The abilities are not very good. You have that tower bomb that happens quite frequently, I suppose. It's not bad, it happens every 15 seconds. And it basically creates this tower bomb. It basically creates this thing that slows down enemies by, I believe, 20%, then 40%, and then 60%. Which is kind of nice, and it lasts for 6 seconds. Which is okay, you know, it has a decent duration. And the slowdown is cool, but this is Vengeance. And in Vengeance, the majority of the enemies are slow anyway, so adding that slowdown doesn't really make too much of a difference. At least I haven't noticed much when I was, you know, trying it out. So yeah, that's kind of a bad. Then we also have the Goblin Scout, who is pretty good usually if you combine it with other towers, because it boosts their radius by 20%, which is kind of nice. It doesn't do anything else though, it just boosts their range. It doesn't boost their attack speed or anything, it's just their radius. Which is kind of cool, but in reality, it's not like super good. It kind of depends on the towers that you're combining him with. If you combine him with good towers, then it's gonna be awesome. If you don't, then the results are not gonna be super good. But still, I kinda like this tower. And then we also have the Paratrooper, who is kinda iffy. He has 20 seconds cooldown, and he lasts for 12 seconds. And he deals, on average, he has about 23 DPS, which it's not bad, but it feels unnecessary, you know? This guy, and even though he does his explosions, the explosions have such a small AoE that it just doesn't, it feels like he's hitting only single targets at one point. So yeah, I don't really like him, but I guess he's a nice addition if you don't have anything else to throw your money at. So yeah, he's not useless, but in most situations, I would much rather not get him. I would much rather get another tower that's actually gonna be very helpful. Very helpful. So yeah, in conclusion, I would say War Zeppelin is pretty bulky tower, but besides its raw DPS, he doesn't really have much going for him. But still, that raw DPS is usually more than enough to push through a lot of levels, so because of that, I'm gonna give him a decent rating. He's not a terrible tower by any means, he is kind of trying to be the battle mecha, but like, he has only half of the things that the battle mecha has. He has the attack rate, he has the damage, but he doesn't have the abilities, man. If his abilities were better, he'll probably be even higher on this tier list, but because of that, I can't quite put him into the super broken towers, because he's not. I've done a challenge with Morgan a while ago, where we tried to beat the game with only War Zeppelin, and to be honest, he didn't perform as well as I thought, so yeah. I guess he'll be going right up in here. Yeah, he's good, but Artillery and Vengeance is kind of weak, so I'm gonna still put him in A, but I really wanted to put him in S, but he's not just quite there yet. But you know what? Alright, for the sake of it, I'm gonna put it in S. But to me personally, he could be a high A, but I would say that he is maybe low S tier. Maybe, on a good day. Oh yeah, also a quick word about Something, because this is recorded after I recorded everything, and it turns out that there was no Swamp Thing in the tier list. Now, I don't know why people didn't just added it, that was kind of weird, but, you know, due to my limited time, I'm just gonna give you a quick, you know, just explanation of the Swamp Thing and why I'll rank him the way I rank him. So, yeah, basically, let's start off with his statistics. As you can see, enormous range. Kind of a short rally point, but that's okay. It has the best range in the game, which is already an insane positive. And we're not talking about just in Vengeance, in any Kingdom Hearts game, which is pretty darn ridiculous. And that's awesome. However, there's even more to its awesomeness. Its damage. Its damage is pretty consistent. It deals between 99 to 110 physical damage every 2.1 seconds, which means that its range damage is surprisingly good. It deals about around 49.7 damage per second, which, you know, it's okay. You know, it's not like too phenomenal or anything, but, you know, it is still good nonetheless. So yeah, that's nice. And then when it's in melee, it deals between 40 to 100 physical damage every 2.5 seconds. So the attack rate is a little bit slower, which means that the melee damage is pretty well. I won't say it's very weak, but it's definitely weaker. Like, we're talking about 28 damage per second on melee, and that's kind of meh. But the thing is that it deals area damage, and it's not like the War Zeppelin where, you know, the AoE is just non-existent. This guy, he has a big AoE effect, and that's what makes him really good. If his AoE effect was the same as the War Zeppelin, he'll probably be bad, but he's not. Look at that. Look at him just shredding him. Plus, he has 3000 health, which is like... Do I even need to explain myself why this is so OP? Like, that's more HP than some heroes. Like, Gerald Lightseeker has nothing on this guy. This guy is tankier than flippin' Gerald. Does that give you any red flags as to why this tower is really good? Well, yeah, it probably does. And also, its abilities are quite wonderful. The Smash ability allows it to have 2, 4, and then 6% chance to perform an insta-kill, which is pretty noticeable. You can see it after, you know, one of the boulders that he throws becomes red. That means that he will perform an insta-kill. Or if he's in melee, his arms will become red and he will, you know, perform his insta-kill, which is nice. Now, if he is in melee, he will not be able to insta-kill hordes of enemies. That will be a little bit too good. But however, with his melee attacks, if he's fighting enemies on the ground and there's flying enemies in its radius, he will affect them, which is actually pretty nice. I kinda like that. And yeah, with that pretty much you can annihilate tough enemies, which is pretty much one major weakness for most towers out of the way. Then you have the Blinding Liquid, which is gonna give him 20, 40 and then 60% chance to stun an enemy on each individual shot. And if he's in melee, that works against every enemy he fights. So you can pretty much stun hordes of enemies. Look at that. Let's just wait for him to get this liquid. There it is, look at that. Horde of enemies, stunned. Stunned for quite a decent amount of time. So yeah, it's quite amazing, not gonna lie. I think the stun lasts for 2 seconds or so. So yeah, it's actually pretty good. if you get like 2 or 3, you can pretty much get a close to near perma-stun pretty much on hordes of enemies. It doesn't matter if they're heavy armored or not, when they're stunned and they don't move and they don't damage you, then you will eventually take them down. Plus you may get a lucky insta-kill every now and then, so yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. And if it wasn't ridiculous enough, then you have the Carnivore ability, which basically allows him to regenerate 35% of its maximum HP whenever he kills a unit. Do you realize how much health that is? That's over 1000 HP, bruh. So yeah, I don't think there's more need to explain the Swamp Thing. It's amazing, and if I still had the tier list up, he would definitely be into the Bass tier. Probably even stronger than the Battle Mecha. Alright, maybe not as strong as the Battle Mecha, but he's just so good at this game, man. He's amazing. The Shrek Tower will rock this game forever, and you can't change that. So yeah, if I had to rank him, he would definitely be into the Bass tier, and yeah, that was my short little segment, so let's get back to the actual end of the video. Alright, here we go. And yeah guys, well, that's pretty much my tower rating. I know it's kind of iffy, and some of my decisions were quite controversial, but hey, that's my opinion, so judge me all you want. Go out into the comments and tell me your opinion, and which towers you like more than me, and which towers you will put higher or lower. And yeah guys, once again, thanks a lot for the 900 subscribers, you really mean a lot to me, and hopefully we'll keep growing strong, and one day we'll reach over 1k, which will be wonderful. Yeah guys, well, with that out of the way, that's gonna do it for the video. Thank you everybody so much for watching, I appreciate you for sticking around to the end, subscribe if you want to see more of this content in the future, and while you're at it, drop a like on the video, it means a lot to me. And I will see you in the next video. Until it comes, that was King Rexy, over and out.